States. So I think that President Trump, if he thinks he's in charge, really needs to look at the past several days and see how this war has actually gone.
Well, we've got about 40 seconds left, and I want to come back to that press conference as well, because it was a very interesting split between the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and Pete Hegseth. There was a lot of statistics. Was there anything missing? We have about 25 seconds.
Yeah, so Secretary Hegseth gave a lot of statistics about how well the war is going. Felt like the Vietnam War, where there was always a body count or a data point. But the big question is the United States achieving its goals in this war? Is the political resolution going to be what the U.S. wants? I don't think he said that.
Paul Musgrave, we appreciate that. Thank you very much indeed. Now, coming up next, the Inside Story. Don't forget, we've got a lot more background on the website as well, aljazeera.com. I'm Rob Matheson. Stay with us.
How is the war playing out in Iran? The U.S.-Israeli assassination of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and other senior security figures has left a power vacuum. How challenging will it be to rebuild its leadership structure? And in light of the recent anti-government protests, could Iran descend into chaos? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamshul. Iran stands at a crossroads. With its top leadership assassinated early in the joint U.S.-Israeli offensive, the remaining layers of power have been trying to maintain control. There are concerns that after January's mass anti-government demonstrations, this war, with two of its biggest enemies, would lead to chaos. U.S. President Donald Trump has made clear his desire for regime change in Iran. He's even urged Iranians to seize the moment and take control of their country. Many argue that what remains of Iranian leadership is struggling for survival. But Iran's leadership is notably complex. It has parallel armies, multiple intelligence services, and several command structures. So, will it survive? Or is the situation spiraling out of control? We'll talk to our guests in just a moment, but first, this report from Imogen Kimber.
Iranians are mourning their supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, assassinated in an airstrike on Saturday. It was the beginning of a joint offensive by the US and Israel, which has seen daily attacks on the capital, Tehran, and 150 other towns and cities. Homes, schools, hospitals, and police stations have been hit. State media report more than 1,000 people have been killed. And the International Atomic Energy Agency has confirmed damage to the entrance of the Natanz nuclear plant. In the holy city of Qom, the Assembly of Experts is preparing to choose a new supreme leader. But the building where those deliberations are usually held was attacked on Tuesday. And Israel's defense minister says whoever is chosen will also be a target for elimination. Since June, joint Israeli-US attacks killed many senior figures in the Revolutionary Guard, along with other security officials and government figures. The Trump administration has provided various narratives for its objectives in striking Iran, including removing the current governing bodies from power.
Turns out the regime who chanted death to America and death to Israel was gifted death from America and death from Israel. This is not a so-called regime change war, but the regime sure did change, and the world is better off for it.
Iran has responded with its own wave of attacks, launching drones and missiles at Israel and US assets in the region. Airports, seaports, hotels, civilian buildings, and energy facilities have also been hit. And the foreign minister says the assault will continue.
They have advanced military technology and a large number of armed forces on land, sea, and air. Everyone has seen what kind of campaign they have launched against us, and we have stood strong.
The impact has far-reaching consequences beyond the Gulf region. Oil and gas prices are soaring, markets are rattled, and neither side is showing any sign of standing down. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
All right, let's go ahead and bring in our guest. Joining us on set is Sasan Karimi, a former deputy to Iran's vice president for strategic affairs. In Beirut is Maha Yahya, director of the Malcolm H. Kerr Carnegie Middle East Center. And in Florida is Christopher Hill, a former U.S. diplomat and ambassador to Iraq. Thanks so much for joining us today on Inside Story. Sasan, let me start with you today. Iran is still attempting to fill in this power vacuum that's been caused by the Israeli and U.S. attacks. Let me ask you, how challenging is it going to be for Iran to rebuild its power structure?
Thank you for having me first. It is not that much vague because Iran has very fully polished and well polished constitutional law that predicts all the mechanisms for different situations to build up any vacuum and fill out any vacuum a power that may happen because not out of war, maybe because of the natural process, people can die, can pass away. So it should be predicted, and it is. So from my point of view, there is no vacuum that much. As you can see, there are days that the country has no supreme leader as an individual, but a council consisting of three is controlling the country. Even in the situation of war with a couple of nuclear entities, United States as a country and the Israeli regime, with full force, the country is in a battlefield, and there is no really vacuum in the power, and no escape, no scare, and nothing, and not even lack of the commanding the war. So also, as Mr. Larijani is sitting on the chair of Secretary of the National Security Council, it is very well being moderated during the war. And also on the shops, every good is available, everything is sorted out by the government of Dr. Pezeshkian. So very, very rarely in such a country, in such a country after 20 years of sanctions, you can see such a sorted out situation during a war.
Okay, Sasan, so you're saying there are protocols, there are procedures that are in place, but obviously this is still a very tenuous moment. And I want to ask you about right now what the concerns are when it comes to how the war is playing out in Iran, especially in light of the recent anti-government protests. I mean, is there concern there amongst the government, amongst the population, that all of this could descend into chaos?
No, because if there is no intervention, that we heard from CNN that CIA is arming the Kurdish group to enter to Iran as some militias. Regardless of that, because of the unification and unity inside Iran, out of a culture, not by law, during the crisis moment like this, regardless of the protests on the streets a couple of months ago, less than a couple of months ago, we didn't see any chaotic version of Iran in these days. Even the same people that are not agree with each other, they are cooperating when something is getting happen. Forget about the few people outside the country, diaspora can play another role, or the dependent populations. But inside the country, we have a kind of unity, which is very beautiful in the very sad moments of war. That when, for example, 11 hospitals are attacked in Iran. One is very close to my own home, 20 meters only away. And people are cooperating in the movies. You can see the very beautiful cooperation and unity. So that is the way during the Iran-Iraq war, which lasted for 8 years, with the whole world behind Saddam Hussein, Iranians could resist.
Maha, let me turn to you now. The Trump administration seems to be making the case or the argument that they believe that this conflict and perhaps an internal uprising in Iran could put an end to the current regime there. I want to ask you, from your vantage point, is that a credible argument? Is that a believable narrative?
Good morning or good afternoon, and thank you for having me. No, it's not. At least at this moment, it's not a very credible argument. Partly because there is no organized opposition that is able to take charge of the country. Iran is a country of 90 million people, multi-ethnic, multi-sectarian, and as your guest described, one with multiple centers of power across different institutions and organizations. So, and at this moment, the only, I would say, declared opposition, not necessarily credible, but declared opposition, is the son of the former Shah, Pahlavi, who is based outside and has very little connections to the country. Internally, we haven't seen an organized opposition. And this idea that somehow a Kurdish uprising would be able to lead the charge, I think, is complete miscalculation, because this is only likely to lead, if this were to happen, if some Kurdish separatist groups were to take the bait, as they say, this will only lead to internal strife and possibly greater chaos. What we're hearing is not just about the potential arming by the CIA of separatist groups, but also we've seen a very concerted attack by the US and the Israeli armed forces, the airplanes, of security checkpoints, of police stations in that entire region. So they're going directly after the state's security apparatus, which means it will become also a very chaotic environment down the road. Even if the bombs were to stop tomorrow, the situation within Iran is going to remain quite tenuous. But I don't see a kind of credible opposition, at least at this moment, rising up to take the reins, so to speak, unless there is an arrangement with someone from within the system. And I think in a post-conflict Iraq, we're likely to see even greater repression than what we've seen so far, in part because whoever is going to take over will have very limited fiscal space, for example, to address the needs of a population that was already very discontent with inflation, the lack of jobs, everything that had been going on.
Ambassador Hill, I think it's safe to say there's been a lot of mixed messaging when it comes to U.S. officials and the rationale for getting into this war. You've had some suggesting that it was because they knew that Israel was going to strike first, and others saying, no, in fact, the U.S. was, the entity that tipped the hand of Israel. Questions as to if this is about regime change or if there was an imminent threat. When we hear so many different versions of what the rationale is for this war, what does that do to the credibility of the U.S. in this region?
Well, I think that's certainly a fair point. I mean, there has been this kind of shifting around of what the purpose of this was, and the term regime change, which is usually associated with failure, policy failure. They seem to have throttled that back a little. You don't hear a lot of regime change. But I think a couple of points need to be made. First of all, there's absolutely no support, no sympathy whatsoever in this country for the rule of Ayatollah Khomeini. I mean, the idea of what Iran has come to represent, has come to symbolize over the last 38 years is something extremely negative in terms of its position in the world. It's got some friends, it's got some partners, but it's very unclear that those partners can do anything to help Iran in this situation. I think, secondly, it's important to understand that the U.S. military knows what it's doing, and we've seen rather devastating effects from these airstrikes. But the question, of course, is, as your question suggests, is what next? I think the U.S. military will be able to look back on this and say, we have seriously degraded any offensive capability that Iran had. That is, they're not going to be able to launch attacks in the future. Their missile force will be decimated. Their naval force, which has occasionally been able to move into Hormuz and create a uncertainty about whether that can remain open. That is being devastated. I think it's pretty clear the nuclear program, although there are different disagreements as to how extensive that was in the first place, that is also being decimated. So the capacity of Iran to create problems outside of its borders has been sharply attenuated in the last 100 hours. And I might add, this is not going to end today. I mean, this is going to continue. But the real question then is what is going to come next? I must say, the U.S. has not been present in Iran for since 1980, since our embassy was frankly taken hostage, where our diplomats were subjected to these, being blindfolded for weeks on end and threatened with mock executions, etc. We have not had any diplomatic relations or diplomatic presence in that country. So I think it's fair to say that we don't know a lot about these internal issues going on in Iran. Often, as we did in Iraq, we turn to people who were from the emigre community, and many of them had judgments about Iraq that were entirely wrong in terms of what was going on internally. And I wouldn't be surprised if we get a little of that today. What is clear to me is that there are a lot of guns there, a lot of differing opinions within Iran. And what worries me, of course, is as you see this attenuation of the state, whether it's police force or army, what I am concerned about, of course, is you'll have a kind of civil unrest grow and turn into a civil war. And anyone who's ever witnessed a civil war knows who pays for that, and they tend to be innocent civilians. So I think these are really difficult moments for Iran. At some point, I think the U.S. will claim success in saying that it's prevented Iran from doing any more mischief overseas. And maybe the Iranians will show, or the Iranian regime, I'm not even sure what to call it. But so far, all it's done is galvanized all the Gulf states against it. And now it's going to get Turkey involved against it. It's really, I think the Iranians, whatever their leadership, they're certainly not showing good judgment. So the real issue ahead is if the U.S. claims some kind of victory, what's going to become of Iran? And at that point, I think it's really going to be a question not for the Kurds, and I completely agree, it's a misguided strategy. It's not about the Kurds. It's not about any other such element. It's going to be about within Iran and how these 90 million people are going to find a government, be able to determine a governing structure that will calm that country down and allow Iran to realize its potential, a potential that clearly exists in its civilization, not in its governing structures.
Let me ask you, there is this argument that what remains of Iranian leadership is going to be struggling for survival. And I want to ask you about that. How complex is the Iranian leadership structure? If you could just put that into perspective for our viewers. We know that it has parallel armies, that it has multiple intelligence services, several command structures. How complicated is all of this?
It's quite complicated, but I don't think the issue is whether they're struggling for survival per se as individuals. I think the entire system, for Iran, this was very much this war presented an existential crisis. In the same way, their reaction, for example, to the protests a month and a half ago was brutal. And in part because it's a weakened regime, it's unable to address internal discontent. And therefore, it came down with an iron fist. Now we have an external war that's literally, crippling the various institutions within the state, various centers of power. Once the dust settles, it's going to be very difficult for them to address all the things that are going to emerge. Whether it's, and I agree with your guests, the issue of civil strife will be looming in a very big way, in addition to the day-to-day discontent with, the closing political space, the inability to speak, the social restrictions, etc., as well as inflation, the value of the Iranian rial, etc. So I think the struggle there will be how to maintain cohesion whilst and keep control over the vast territory, whilst trying to grapple with all the different governance issues that will emerge. Until now, I mean, the idea that this system is going to fade away or crumble away, I think again is a mistake. Until now, for example, we have not seen, and these are the things, as an observer, I'd be looking for. We haven't seen any cracks within the security sector, no leaks within the political elite. Everyone's come together in a very strong way to defend the system. Now, once the dust of battle settles, that's a different question altogether. And I worry because what we're seeing today is in America and in Israel that have opened, they've shot the first shot. They've launched into a war of choice, frankly. This is a war of choice. There was no direct, all the security assessments we're seeing, there was no direct threat to the United States of America. So this was a war of choice that was launched and that has dragged the entire region and frankly beyond the region. We're seeing the impact, for example, of gas prices, the whole energy supply networks in Europe, among other places. So Europe, some countries in Europe are starting to get embroiled into this because the US and Israel went into this without any kind of coordination, even with their allies. Unlike 2003, for example, when George Bush went into Iraq, or even 1991, there was an international coalition that went through the UN. There was international support for this. In this case, there's no support, or there's very little support. People were taken, countries, allies, everyone was taken by surprise. And the escalation was very rapid, and it's brought everyone into the fray. And I think, frankly, that's also part of Iran's strategy. And we were all also surprised by the fact that they very quickly went after all countries in the Gulf, including Qatar and Oman, both of which are countries that were trying to mediate between solutions, whether it's on the Israeli front or on the Iranian front with the US and others. So it took many of us by surprise that they would launch these all-out attacks, not only on American.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I want to, the point that you're making, I actually want to ask Sasan about, because he's also reacting to what you're saying. Look, you heard Maha there talking about the fact that this has spiraled to include the region at this point, and she was also talking about the Iranian attacks on neighboring countries, including Qatar, of course. We know Iran has responded with this wave of attacks the past few days. They've launched drones and missiles at Israel and U.S. assets in the region, but there's also been airports, seaports, hotels, civilian buildings, energy facilities that have been hit in these countries. The foreign minister of Iran says that these assaults will continue. From your vantage point, can Iran now get to a point where things can de-escalate? And how does that happen?
Let me, before answering your question, review another time that we shouldn't tell story from the end. The story is that invading another country is totally abandoned by the United Nations Charter. Okay, unless you have a resolution under Chapter 7, Article number 52, which you don't have. Internally, inside the United States, you need to ratify it at the Congress. You don't have. So it is internally and internationally unlawful to attack Iran. So Iran is not has not initiated any attack to its foreign, its neighbors. Its neighbors are the best friends of Iran, that always Iran wants to raise friendship hand to them, especially the Arab countries, especially Turkey, etc. As Maya said a Qatar and Oman, and also Turkey, were the ones who wanted to mediate between Iran and the United States. Who betrayed the table? Who attacked the negotiations for the second time? Who attacked uh, the other party of the talks in the middle of talks? So this is not a trustful or a trust-building behavior. Who can talk about a further round of talks between Iran and the United States in Iran? For the third time during the talks, we should be attacked? Who is the country in the region who initiated the war? Who is the country in the region who initiated attacks against 5 countries? I count for you: Iran, Gaza, Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, and Qatar. Israel. Who is mentioning and talking about a greater country for itself? Israel, not Iran. Iran did not initiate any attack since 200 years ago up until now.
Hassan,
and they are all only remedials.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we just don't have much time left. I want to ask you, you're talking about friendly countries and trying to... How do you begin to rebuild trust with these countries that have mediated in light of the fact that now not just energy infrastructure, but civilian targets have been hit in these countries by Iran?
Yeah, that's why, that's because of the fact that our civilian infrastructure, including hospitals, including 165 kids, very small primary school daughters, are already killed and attacked by the United States from these bases around us. So we attack them there as a remedial measure, not initiate any attack to our neighbors. De-escalation is possible, but Iranians are furious, but I never heard any offer that Iran should consider.
Hassan, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we just have about a minute left. And Ambassador Hill, I just need to ask you, there is a lot of speculation right now as to whether or not the U.S. would attempt to put boots on the ground in Iran. You were addressing that somewhat in your answer earlier, but I want to know from your vantage point, do you think that is something that is on the table now that the Trump administration would attempt going forward?
I would be reluctant to say that there's anything not on the table, but that said, I believe it is extremely unlikely to see so-called boots on the ground. I would like to take exception to the notion that Iran was innocently sitting around and suddenly was brutally attacked by the United States and Israel. Iran has been a huge supporter of terrorism over the years. I mean, when I was in Iraq, I was attacked by a improvised explosive device, something called the Promise Day Brigade. That device came straight out of Iran. So I really have to take exception to the idea that Iran is innocent in this.
That
Iran
only
has
happens
been
with you
extremely
guys.
belligerent in its
White
neighborhood, and
man.
frankly, to the world at large. And one hopes that when the dust finally settles and they get through this, that Iran can again take its place as a responsible state in the world, but that has not been the case for many years.
All right, but we have run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the conversation. And thanks so much to all of our guests, Hassan Karimi, Maha Yahya, and Christopher Hill. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, that's aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now. It is 18 GMT, and you're watching Al Jazeera's coverage of the conflict between the U.S., Israel, and Iran. I'm Cyril Vanier. The U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth says that the war will last for as long as President Donald Trump decides. Speaking at the Pentagon earlier, he also told reporters that the U.S. has unleashed sheer destruction on Iran.
We are only 4 days into this, and the results have been incredible. Historic, really. Only the United States of America could lead this. Only us. But when you add the Israeli Defense Forces, a devastatingly capable force, the combination is sheer destruction for our radical Islamist Iranian adversaries. They are toast, and they know it.
U.S. and Israeli strikes have pounded cities across Iran. The capital, Tehran, has endured some of the worst. Since Saturday, U.S. and Israeli attacks across Iran have killed at least 1,045 people. That is according to Iranian state media. And Turkey has become the latest country to intercept an Iranian missile. A ballistic missile fired from Iran towards its airspace was shot down by NATO's air defenses in the eastern Mediterranean. The Pentagon saying that it does not anticipate that this incident will bring NATO into the war, because Turkey, of course, is a NATO member. And the Pentagon has released footage of its submarine torpedoing an Iranian naval vessel in the Indian Ocean. Sri Lanka has rescued 32 submariners after receiving a distress call. The country's deputy foreign minister saying that at least 87 people were killed in that attack. Israel has carried out a new wave of strikes across Lebanon, killing at least 72 people and injuring hundreds since Monday. It has struck what it's called Hezbollah infrastructure in southern Beirut. The Israeli military has also made ground incursions into several towns in southern Lebanon. Well, Al Jazeera is live in Tehran, in Qatar's capital, Doha, in Ramallah, in the occupied West Bank, and in Washington, D.C. The U.S. says that it is confident about the operation against Iran. Speaking at the Pentagon, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, warned that Washington is stepping up attacks. He said in the next 24 to 48 hours, the U.S. will continue striking Iran's naval capability and infrastructure. Kane said 500 ballistic missiles have so far been launched by Iran, as well as more than 2,000 drones. But he stressed that the number of ballistic missiles fired by Iran has declined by 86% since the first day of fighting. So those are a few numbers that we have on day 5. Manuel Rapallo is in Washington, D.C. Manuel, you followed that briefing. We're 100 hours into this war, roughly. Give us a little bit more detail on what we found out from the Pentagon. What does the U.S. military say that it has achieved so far, and what is the priority moving forward?
Good to be with you, Cyril. As you mentioned, this was a press conference by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, as well as Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. This was very much an operational update over the United States military advances so far since operations began. You said now 100 hours into this conflict. Secretary of Defense Hegseth touted what he says is an all-out that America is winning. In no uncertain terms, America is winning. He touted the sinking of an Iranian warship by an American torpedo, saying that this is something that hasn't occurred since World War II. He spoke about naval and air superiority by the United States, the undermining of the Iranian Navy, the fact that the United States now controls the airspace over Iran, speaking at great length about the details and aircraft being used, such as B-2s, stealth fighters, American drones, the destruction of Iranian missile capabilities, and the number of targets that have been hit. This is something that we also heard at length from the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff. More of an operational update than anything else.
Right. Heidi Jo Castro is on Capitol Hill. Heidi, you're monitoring what's happening in Congress. You're expecting a Senate vote a little later that could, in theory, I stress in theory, limit this U.S. military campaign. Run us through that.
That's right. In theory is the perfect wording, because the U.S. Constitution does say that it is Congress that should authorize, decide whether the U.S. is at war. But in practice, President Trump launched this war against Iran without asking permission from anyone, and Democrats here in Capitol Hill, they have a problem with that. So in the coming hours, we're expecting the Democrat Senator Tim Kaine to force a vote on a resolution that would seek to constrain Trump's war powers in Iran. That is a piece of bill that is co-sponsored by a Republican, Rand Paul, but he is the only Republican so far in the Senate who has said he supports this, and they need at least 4 others to cross the line to make this pass in the Republican-controlled chamber. That is unlikely to happen. And even if that tall hurdle is overcome today, the same resolution would need to pass the Republican-controlled House, and then President Trump could just wave it all away with a presidential veto. So what is the purpose of this? Democrats say it's important to get members on the record here, and that it's important to try to use congressional authority as the U.S. Constitution authorizes them. But again, it's an uphill battle and unlikely to pass today.
Back to Manuel Rapallo, who was following that Pentagon briefing. Manuel, there have been questions about American munitions stockpiles and how long the U.S. could potentially sustain this military effort, given how much it's consuming interceptors and missiles. What details did you get on that from the Pentagon?
As you mentioned, Cyril, there have been concerns voiced over how long the United States can sustain a prolonged conflict like this, and whether or not these stockpiles of munitions could hold. What we heard today at the Pentagon by Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is that, quote, the United States is accelerating its operations and has a practically unlimited stockpile, and that capable of, quote, sustaining this fight for as long as it takes. This obviously is contradicting other claims that we're hearing that the Defense Department, defense contractors like Lockheed Martin are supposed to be meeting at the White House at the end of this week on Friday to talk about a $50 billion supplemental budget for U.S. military operations in the Middle East. So it's part of the criticism that we're hearing over what many are calling mixed messages from senior officials of the Trump administration. And we should note here also that in the immediate aftermath of those first attacks on Friday by the United States against Iran, there was a sort of understanding that President Trump would not be pursuing or seeking to make this a prolonged conflict, a sustained conflict, that President Trump, someone who very politically savvy and understands very well the optics of what it would look like for American service members to be returning to the United States from Iran in caskets draped in American flags, would be not a good optic for him politically, especially with the midterm elections coming up later in November. So the longer this conflict drags on, the more he'll have to answer to his base. The more American service members are killed, the more he'll have to answer to his base, which is seeing a rift growing over what many see as a betrayal of his promise to not be pursuing these endless foreign wars.
Yeah, and 6 American soldiers have been killed so far. Mike Hanna, you're at the White House. So the Pentagon laid out its military objectives, which are destroy Iran's military capabilities, make sure it can never have a nuclear bomb. All of that is expected to take several weeks. We don't know how many. Has the president explained what he envisions after that? And Mike, by the way, I'll just let our viewers know that we are expecting that briefing at the White House where you are. Could happen any minute now. Our eyes are trained on that. If we have to go to that live event, we will, and you'll help us do that. But for now, has the U.S. president explained what he sees happening with Iran after his military campaign?
No, we haven't got that far at all. We do not know or have any indication of what the exit ramp is here. We actually do not know what the end aim of the US president is and his administration. At what point will the administration and President Trump believe that the aims have been achieved? We do not know any of that. We are waiting to hear from the press secretary. The podium is up there waiting for her to come in, and maybe some light may be cast on some of these questions, but they are very fundamental questions which will be asked in the Senate debate, which will be going on ahead shortly. But there have been no clear answers. We've heard repeatedly from President Trump as to what the operational aims are. We've heard that from the Pentagon as well, but we haven't heard what the end aim is, what the final thrust, the final objective of this operation is. And as Manny was saying a little bit earlier, the longer this conflict lasts, the more problematic it gets politically for the president domestically. So those are the issues that are being faced here, but President Trump not confronting them. He also, and this is very important, has not given a time frame. He has facilitated in a way on a time frame, speaking at the beginning of the conflict, 3 to 4 days, that then suddenly went to 4 weeks or more. And now we hear from the Pentagon that there is no timeline on this, that the operations will continue until the objectives are achieved, without saying
what the objective is. So it's how long is a piece of string is basically the fundamental question we're looking at.
Yeah, back to Capitol Hill for this fundamental question of how much support or pushback there is for this war in the country. Heidi Jo Castro, you have obviously your finger on the pulse of Congress. How much support versus pushback are you seeing there and even beyond Congress?
Well, Sarah, among Republicans here on the Hill, we're hearing pretty much ironclad support for the administration launching these attacks on Iran, save for Rand Paul. Of course, that's the senator who is co-sponsoring this War Act resolution along with the Democrat Tim Kaine. But again, that resolution unlikely to have much traction today or through the House. But we did hear strong words, strong rebukes coming from the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer earlier in the day, responding to that update from the Pentagon, saying that it sounds like, he said that the U.S. was just getting started in this war, that it seemed open-ended and was expanding, and he's feared that eventually Trump might order U.S. boots on the ground in Iran, which he pointed out is very much opposed to by the U.S. public. In fact, so far this war has been deeply unpopular with the general American electorate, with only 1 in 4 saying that they agreed, that they approved with these decisions taken by Trump. And so just as Manny was saying, this might be the ultimate check on Trump's powers here. If Congress does not enact these war resolutions and does not take that constitutionally ordained authority, then it might be the U.S. electorate in the upcoming midterm elections. I've been hearing on the streets from Americans, including Trump supporters themselves, saying that they do not like where this is headed. They're very concerned with the open-ended nature of this conflict, and they might take that out against Trump in the polls in November.
Let's see what we can learn from Iran now. On day 5 of this conflict, Mohammed Val is in the Iranian capital. Mohammed, the U.S. says it has destroyed the Iranian Navy and is about to achieve complete control of Iranian skies from a military standpoint. What are you able to report? And what, if anything, is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard saying?
Yes, Cyril, in terms of explosions, the loudest explosion heard in the northern part of Tehran just a while ago. And that's just one of many today. We have many cities that have been targeted aside from Tehran. We have Bushehr, we have Asfahan, we have Qazvin. Qazvin, where 6 people were killed, and also eastern Azerbaijan in the northeast of the country, where 55 people have been killed. So the death toll is rising, and the scope of the bombardment is also widening. So the Americans are true to their promise, and the Israelis, they are widening this war here in Iran from the air, and it is hurting. Civilians are being killed, and the devastation is getting more and more visible. But at the same time, the Iranians are still defiant, and they have announced, the Revolutionary Guard has announced the 18th wave of the True Promise #4 campaign to resist and to defend the country. It takes a bit to get the details of the targets that have been hit or targeted by these 18th wave, but we understand that there is a lot of damage, according to the Iranians, being inflicted on the enemy. They are talking about a widespread range of targets inside Israel over the day, and also about ships that have been targeted. One of them is still on fire in the Strait of Hormuz. In respect to their promise of closing the Strait of Hormuz as a part of this campaign, and there is also reports of other explosions and other drones sent against U.S. Targets in Kuwait and North Iraq.
Nida Ibrahim is in Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Nida, on your end, what's the news out of Israel on day 5 of this military campaign?
Well, the Israeli authorities are talking about estimates of 1 week of the war in Iran. That would be on Saturday, and they're talking about $2 billion of losses expected to be targeting the facilities, the infrastructure, as well as the buildings that are getting damaged. That's not to mention the price and the cost of the war itself. Also, the Israeli Finance Minister, Bezalel Smotrich, has asked for easing some restrictions on the economy to kind of help the economy get by. We are also looking at the Ben Gurion airport that is expected to be opening its airspace tomorrow to repatriate some of the military people who have been stranded abroad, some of the civilians who have been stranded abroad, but they will be taken via military aircraft, as far as the Israeli transportation minister has said. So again, all attempts are trying to keep the population in support of the government, in support of this war. And we always have to remind our viewers that Iran has been very high on the Israeli agenda for years, talking about it as an existential threat, trying to lobby for such a war. And that's why many believe that Netanyahu has found a very key moment in time to convince President Trump to strike Iran. And we've heard also from the Israeli defense minister, who says that this strike was scheduled later in the year, talking about June. But because the protests have broken out in Iran, that kind of prompted them to start the operation a little bit earlier and sooner. But again, for the Israelis, this is an important war. They're all rallying for now around the flag, trying to say that this is a very key battle that needed to be taken. But it remains to be seen how long can that support remain for the government if Iran indeed uses this very slow and tactical missile launching towards Israel that will kind of exhaust the population if it lasts beyond weeks.
And here in the Gulf, Qatar's Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani has held a phone call with Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. This is, of course, in the context of Qatar having been attacked multiple times in the last few days by Iranian drones and missiles. The statement after the call, this is the Qatari statement, said, the Prime Minister firmly rejected claims by Iran that the missile attacks were directed solely at U.S. interests. The facts on the ground clearly show that the attacks struck civilian and residential areas inside the state of Qatar. He stressed that such attacks reveal no goodwill on Iran's part towards its neighbors. Al Jazeera's Laura Khan is in Doha. What more do we hear from Qatar on this, Laura?
Well, Cyril, this is very important because it's the first time these two countries have had any form of communication since the beginning of the war. Before this, they were on relatively friendly terms. However, last June, during the 12-day war, there were attacks from Iran on Al Udeid air base. Iran considers this to be a U.S. asset, but this is also a Qatari airbase. It's Qatari built as well, so they consider this an attack on its sovereignty. But it extends well beyond there. Qatar says that the continuous volley of ballistic missiles, of cruise missiles, and of drones into the country, it's been attacking the energy infrastructure, its civilian infrastructure, and also its military. So it's condemned them. There's a big disconnect between the two countries. The Qatari Prime Minister said, essentially, you're wrong. You have been attacking these, and that it has every right to respond under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. But there's been a number of diplomatic lines coming in as well. The Gulf Cooperation Council will be holding a meeting with the European Union. They might be looking for a coordinated response to this, because it's not only seen huge consequences across the Gulf region of this war, as they've continuously had their air defenses tested with a barrage of missiles and drones, but it's had huge consequences across the world, particularly when it comes to its energy needs, where a number of energy facilities have been shut down in order to keep the safety of staff. Both
Laura, I have to interrupt. We have a live event at the White House.
They are paying in blood. Since 1979, the terrorist Iranian regime has actively and intentionally facilitated the killings of Americans. They chant death to America and fund other radical terrorists who attack our country and are death to America and fund other radical terrorists who attack our country and are seeking to destroy Western civilization itself. These terrorists seized our embassy and took 66 Americans hostage in Tehran. They slaughtered 241 U.S. service members with a truck bombing in Beirut. They killed and maimed hundreds of American service members in Iraq. And this is just a small fraction of their blood-soaked record. Prior leaders have been too weak and ineffective to address this threat. Some, like Barack Hussein Obama, even sent pallets of cash that ultimately financed this terrorist crusade against the United States and our people, while signing stupid and naive deals that put Iran on the path of developing nuclear bombs. After years of endless appeasement and empty statements from politicians on both sides of the political aisle in this town, President Trump is finally the man of action. President Trump is holding these monsters accountable and permanently extinguishing their nuclear ambitions. Future generations of Americans will look to this moment as the moment where the specter of a nuclear armed Iran ended. At the beginning of Operation Epic Fury, launched last weekend, President Trump laid out clear objectives to the American people on what the U.S. military seeks to accomplish through these major combat operations. Number one, destroy the regime's deadly ballistic missiles and completely raze their missile industry to the ground. Number two, annihilate the Iranian regime's navy. And so far, we have destroyed more than 20 Iranian ships, including their top submarine last night, using a torpedo for the first time since World War II. There is not a single Iranian ship underway in the Arabian Gulf, Strait of Hormuz, or the Gulf of Oman. Number three, Operation Epic Fury will ensure the regime's terrorist proxies in the region can no longer destabilize the region or the free world and attack our armed forces. And thus far, Iran's proxies are hardly putting up a fight. Number four, this mission will guarantee that Iran can never obtain a nuclear weapon. It's safe to say that thus far, Operation Epic Fury has been a resounding success. American forces have struck more than 2,000 targets, destroying hundreds and hundreds of ballistic missiles, launchers, and drones. As the Department of War said this morning, we expect to have complete and total dominance over Iranian airspace in the coming hours, clearing the skies for our brave warriors to continue achieving these noble and long sought-after objectives. There's been a lot of misreporting and intellectual dishonesty from the American media on why President Trump decided to launch this operation. So let me remind you, Operation Midnight Hammer, which took place last June, obliterated Iran's 3 major nuclear sites. Yet the terrorist Iranian regime has remained fully committed to rebuilding its nuclear program. How do we know this? Because Iran has pursued this path of war and violence despite President Trump dispatching 2 of his top and most trusted negotiators to engage in exhaustive and good faith negotiations to try and reach a deal. And the world knows this president's preference is always peace and diplomacy first. Look no further than the 8 additional global conflicts he has ended in the past year as proof. Unfortunately, the terrorist Iranian regime refused to negotiate in good faith. They chose this path of violence and destruction, and they are reaping the consequences of their horrible decision. The regime did what they always have done. They lied, they delayed, they tried to string the United States of America along. They wanted to buy themselves time to continue building ballistic missiles and other deadly weaponry that could harm our U.S. personnel and troops in the region, and to continue aggressively pursuing their unacceptable nuclear ambitions. U.S. negotiators offered to lift crippling sanctions on Iran and even provide nuclear fuel to Iran at no cost to support a civil nuclear power program. They additionally had the opportunity to accept U.S. support as an investor in potential projects to develop peaceful nuclear energy together under a mutually agreed upon framework. Yet in response, Iran would have to forfeit their enrichment capacity once and for all. But Iran rejected. They accepted none of these generous and unprecedented offers by the United States. Simply put, they refused to say yes to peace. And their refusal made clear that their number one priority was building a nuclear weapon with which to threaten the United States of America. Again, the country they have been chanting death to for nearly 5 decades. Let me state this again clearly. Iran rejected the path of peace because the terrorists in charge of this regime wanted to build nuclear weapons to use against Americans and our allies. President Trump made the determination a courageous determination and decision that the path the United States was on with Iran had only one outcome: massive death and destruction at the hands of a nuclear-armed terroristic regime. That path of death and destruction and threats against the American people have ended, with Operation Epic Fury. Operation Epic Fury has forged a new path that will better ensure the security of the United States and our people. The terrorists made a bet that President Trump would be like many of his predecessors, that he would just talk and he would refuse to enforce his clear red lines. But that is proving to be a catastrophic error in judgment. When President Trump makes a threat, and I have reiterated that threat many times from this podium to all of you over the past year, President Trump does not bluff. The president's words are backed up by the mightiest warriors in the world who possess the most sophisticated capabilities this world has ever known. 49 and counting of the most senior Iranian regime leaders, including the supreme leader, have already been wiped off the face of the earth. Make no mistake, killing these brutal terrorists is good for America and makes the world a much safer place. I want to also extend our prayers and condolences to the families of the 6 U.S. military service members who have been lost in Operation Epic Fury. These heroes represent the very best among us. They laid down their lives in defense of our country, and we will never forget their legacy or their sacrifice. As the president said, we grieve for these American patriots and their families as we continue the righteous mission for which they gave their lives. President Trump intends to attend the dignified transfer of these American heroes to stand in grief alongside their families. I understand the Department of War is working on scheduling this transfer, and we will provide updates at the appropriate time. Finally, the Trump administration is also doing everything within our power to protect Americans in harm's way. Since the launch of Operation Epic Fury, more than 17,500 Americans have safely returned home from the Middle East, with over 8,500 American citizens returning home to the United States just yesterday alone. If you are a U.S. citizen in the Middle East looking to return to the United States, the Secretary of State asks that you please register with the State Department at step.state.gov. The State Department will identify where you are and provide travel options directly to you. The administration is already rapidly chartering flights free of charge and booking commercial options, which we expect to become increasingly available as time goes on and the success of this mission further comes to fruition. I know the President and Secretary of State Rubio have been in touch as well with our allies in the region directly about this problem, making it clear that it is a priority of the United States of America to bring every American home. The Trump administration will not rest until every American is home safely and until the terrorist threat from Iran has been completely destroyed. With that, I'll take your questions. Eric, why don't you kick us off today? Thank you for being here.
It's great to be here. As you mentioned, Iran's regime, its leadership has largely been decimated. We have a sense right now of who's actually calling the shots in Iran, and we're also hearing reports that the Supreme Leader's son may be named his successor. Do you have any more information about that? I just had a quick follow-up as well.
Sure. We've seen those reports as well, of course, and this is something that our intelligence agencies are closely monitoring and looking at. The truth is, we'll have to wait and see. The president has said repeatedly that the objectives of Operation Epic Fury are the 4 military objectives that I laid out for you previously. To destroy Iran's navy, to destroy their ballistic missile capacity, to ensure their proxies in the region can no longer harm Americans, and to also ensure that they can never obtain a nuclear weapon. As for what comes next for Iran, the president has said, of course, it's a good thing for the United States to want freedom for the Iranian people, and ultimately we hope that freedom rests in their hands.
Arab and Muslim nations coming under fire as well. President Trump's vision for the region has been to bring the Arab and Muslim nations to the table together, Abraham Accords, obviously, with Israel. If this regime topples, could we see a new day in the region and really a new Middle East come out of this when the dust settles?
Well, though the greatest deterrent to true and long-lasting peace in the Middle East has always been the rogue Iranian terrorist regime. And our Arab and Gulf partners in the nation admit that, as well as, of course, our close friend and ally Israel. We have seen all of the Arab partners in the region come together during this time on the phone with President Trump, many of them commending him for this bold and brave action to protect American troops and our bases in the region that are housed in many of these Arab and Gulf states. And I know that many of these regional partners are contributing their air defense capabilities as well. Jordan, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, and the president continues to be engaged with all of them. Welcome. Garrett.
Also, humor me. Axios, I think, was the first to report this morning this phone call between the president and Prime Minister Netanyahu, saying that Netanyahu had given the U.S. this information about where the Ayatollah would be and that he'd be with his deputies on Saturday. How important was that information in the president making the decision to strike where and when he did?
I think it was important with respect to the timeline. But I think the president, prior to that phone call, had a good feeling that the Iranian regime was going to strike the United States assets and our personnel in the region. And the president was faced with a choice. Does the United States of America use our military and our capabilities to strike first, to take out this threat that has been threatening our country and our people for 47 years? Or is he going to, as commander-in-chief, sit back and watch as the rogue Iranian regime attacks our people in the region? That's obviously an unacceptable decision. For the second choice there is unacceptable to the president, which is why he made this decision. As for where the Ayatollah was going to be, that obviously had an impact on the timeline of the operation, but not quite the president's decision in its entirety.
On the way the public is viewing this, we were sitting here last week. I asked you if the president was going to make this a big part of the State of the Union, if he felt like he had to sell the possibility that he'd do strikes like this. We're now 5 days on, hasn't done kind of the traditional speech to the nation part of it. Does the president believe the country supports the actions that he's taken so far in Iran?
I think he does. And I think the president knows the country is smart enough to read past many of the fake news headlines produced by people in this room that this action was unjustifiable. Again, this is a rogue terrorist regime that has been threatening the United States, our allies, and our people for 47 years. And the American people are smart enough to know that. And they've also been smart enough to listen to the president himself, not just over the past year in this second term, but during his first term as president, and also for the past 40 years of his life. This is a president who has been remarkably consistent on this issue, that Iran can never obtain a nuclear weapon. And the president tried peace through diplomacy exhaustively and extensively. He and his team gave it their best go, and the president ultimately came to the determination of that peace was not a pursuable path. The Iranian regime, they want death, they want destruction, they want to kill Americans, and that's unacceptable to this president. It's intolerable to him as commander-in-chief. Jackie.
Caroline. Obviously seen the update from the State Department on the 17,500 Americans that have already come back, including some 8,000 just yesterday. There are still 6,000 that are looking to get out, as I understand it. And just in the context of what you just told Garrett about the president's decision on a timeline, if he had decided to do this strike before receiving, the specific intelligence about the meeting on Saturday, should there have been more done in advance of the strikes to try to get those Americans in the region resources and information to get home before day 3 of the war?
There was many signs put out by the State Department, and I wish that everyone in this room would report on them. The Secretary of State issued level 4 travel advisories dating back to January for many of these countries in the region. On January 14th, the U.S. mission to Saudi Arabia advised personnel and Americans to exercise increased caution and limit non-essential travel to any military installations. On February 11th, the U.S. Department of State Consular Affairs shared a list of countries with level 4 do not travel advisories. You can't be much more clear than that. Do not travel to these following countries. On February 23rd, the U.S. Embassy in Lebanon ordered non-emergency government personnel and family members to leave Lebanon due to safety risks, and we helped them do that. On March 2nd, the State Department urged U.S. citizens to depart Lebanon immediately. With respect to Iran, on February 27th, the Secretary designated Iran as a state of sponsor of wrongful detention and stated no Americans should travel to Iran for any reason. And again, on February 27th, the U.S. ambassador to Israel warned Americans to leave Iran, and they provided travel advisory alerts through the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. So the State Department was all hands on deck on advising extreme caution and do not travel alerts to Americans in the region. With respect to the Americans who are still in the region now, again, the State Department is asking that they register at the website so they can directly identify you. And we are actively and rapidly working to charter flights. There is some commercial flights that are taking off intermittently, from these countries, and we plan to get Americans on board as quickly as possible, again, free of charge to them. And we have some additional measures that I think will be announced in the coming days. Again, I can also reiterate from the president's perspective, this is something he's brought up directly with our allies and partners in the region, that we expect their help in getting Americans home. And we will do that, and we will not rest until every single American is returned home safely.
And then one follow-up just on how people might be experiencing this at home. With respect to the economy and the cost of oil spiking, is there a need to start those Navy escorts in the Strait of Hormuz now to sort of blunt the impact to people? And also, because Spain is a member of the EU, does that at all put a wrinkle in the president's plan for a trade embargo with that?
With respect to Spain, I think they heard the president's message yesterday loud and clear. And it's my understanding over the past several hours, they've agreed to cooperate with the U.S. military. And so I know that the U.S. military is coordinating with their counterparts in Spain. But the president expects all of our European allies, of course, to cooperate in this long sought after mission, not just for the United States, but also for Europe, to crush the rogue Iranian regime that, again, not only threatens America, but also threatens our European allies as well. With respect to oil prices and the economy here at home, of course, this is something that Secretary Bessent, Secretary Wright, the National Economic Council of Energy, that is led by Secretary Burgum, has been long working on and well in advance. Yesterday, President Trump announced the U.S. Development Finance Corporation will provide political risk insurance at a very reasonable price for crude carriers and cargo ships operating in and around the Gulf. And as you pointed out, Jackie, the president said, if necessary and when appropriate, the U.S. Navy will begin escorting tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. I think it speaks to why this action was so necessary, that ultimately the energy industry is going to benefit from the president's actions with respect to Iran, because Iran will no longer be controlling the Strait of Hormuz and restricting the free flow of energy, which, as you all know, controls 20% of the world's global oil supply. Sure.
Thanks, Caroline. The president said yesterday there wasn't time to make evacuation plans because this all happened so quickly. Given how critical the president has been of the chaotic evacuation from Afghanistan by the last administration 5 years ago, why wasn't there more of a focus on evacuation plans from the Middle East that could have been at least put in place, ready to go before the strikes this weekend?
Again, I just laid out for you that there have been plans in place and that the State Department has been very clear to the American people traveling within this region not to travel to these regions. We gave notices to leave immediately the countries where these Americans were within. And unlike the previous administration, we actually have a number. We actually have identified the number of people in the region who have requested help. We are in direct contact and engagement with them. And you have to keep in mind, there's a few thousand people who have requested assistance to come home in comparison to the millions who we understand are in the region. So we will help every single American who wants to come home if they're making that request of the State Department.
Americans who called the State Department hotline as recently as last night were being told, we can't help you, you have to make your own plans.
Well, the line was updated, and I expect every single person in this room to report on that accurately, so that information can be relayed appropriately to your audiences and to the American people. I think as journalists, you all have a responsibility to let them know that the line has been updated accordingly with the proper guidance, because I saw many people in this room very quick to do selfie videos with the line yesterday, but not so quick to report on the corrected message today. So that is something the administration quickly worked to address, and we have fixed that problem. However, we're also pointing to people to the website, again, to register so that we know exactly where you are. So when there are commercial flights moving into that area, when there are chartered flights moving into that area, we can get Americans on planes as quickly as possible.
Can you tell us how many charter flights have been able to get out of the region so far with Americans on board?
I don't have an exact count for you, but I know that we're working on chartering many flights. As soon as we were doing it yesterday, we're doing it again today. And you should not expect us to detail exactly when these flights are taking off for obvious reasons. The Iranians have shown that they are not going to hesitate to target civilians in the region, which is completely intolerable. But for safety and security reasons, we're not going to be broadcasting when flights full of Americans are going to be taking off, obviously. Danny.
At the top there, you said that the Iranian regime is being absolutely crushed. Can you explain explicitly say then whether or not regime change is a goal of President Trump's operation?
The goals of this operation have been made very clear, Danny, and the president has said them in his speech when he launched this operation and released that video in the middle of the night to all of you and to the world. The stated military objectives of Operation Epic Fury are as follows: eliminate Iran's ballistic missile threat, destroy their naval capability, disrupt missile and drone production infrastructure, sever their pathway, and end their pathway to nuclear weapons. And I can report, as you all saw from the Pentagon today, that thus far this operation has been remarkably successful. Again, we're moving towards complete and total control of Iranian airspace. We have continuous 24/7 strike operations ongoing. We've had more than 2,000 targets that have been struck, nearly 2,000 munitions have been employed. The first 24 hours of this campaign were described nearly as twice the scale of the 2003 shock and awe campaign. And we've seen that the enemy, the Iranian rogue regime, their retaliatory strikes against the United States and the threat reduction has reduced significantly. If you look at the Iranian ballistic missile launches, they're down 86% from day one levels. So while the United States military continues to increase its complete dominance over this rogue regime, they are weakening day by day.
A phrase that you would want to use?
Again, Operation Epic Fury, I just detailed the goals and objectives of this very quickly. But obviously, as the president has said numerous times, do we want to see Iran being led by a rogue terrorist regime? No, of course not. So any day the United States of America is taking out a terrorist is a good day for our country and a good day for our people.
Given that point that you just make about the United States, wouldn't mind seeing the government overthrown. Certainly President Trump has talked about wanting to see Iranians overthrow the government. Has the president considered at all kind of how he views a U.S. role, if any, in Iran post-conflict?
I think it's something the president is actively considering and discussing. But again, right now, the focus, minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, is on ensuring the quick and effective success of Operation Epic Fury. Sure, go ahead.
I want to ask you about the U.S. munitions.
I don't even know who's speaking because I wasn't looking at you. But you can ask the question and then I'll go to you.
I want to ask about the U.S. munitions stockpile. President Trump posted on Truth Social on Monday that the U.S. still has a good supply of weapons, but that we're not where we need to be. What does he mean by that? And does President Trump then want to ask on Congress to pass a supplemental to increase funding for missile interceptor systems like the ones being used to defend U.S. bases in the Middle East from Iranian missiles?
I don't have any updates for you on congressional asks from the president. As you know, under this president, we have significantly increased our defense budget, which is a good thing for the United States, for our national security, and for protecting our homeland. With respect to munitions, ammunition, weapon stockpiles, the United States of America has more than enough capability to not only successfully execute Operation Epic Fury, but to go much further. And we have weapon stockpiles in places that many people in this world don't even know about. However, the president in that post was pointing out that unfortunately, we had a very stupid and incompetent leader in this White House for 4 years who gave away many of our best weapons for nothing, for free, to another country very far away by the name of Ukraine. So the president was pointing out how that was an unwise decision, but nevertheless, don't doubt the strength and the might of the American military. And I will also add, President Trump has rightfully been calling on defense contractors in this country to rapidly and aggressively produce American-made weapons because they are the best in the world. And the president always likes to get things done as quickly as possible. And so he's been quite vocal in his efforts to try to speed up our defense industry to protect our homeland. Go ahead.
Caroline, could you tell us about the president's current thinking about ground troops and whether they could be used if they were to be sent into Iran? What would they be used for? What's the situation?
Well, they're not part of the plan for this operation at this time, but I certainly will never take away military options on behalf of the President of the United States or the Commander-in-Chief, and he wisely does not do the same for himself. I know there's many leaders in the past who like to take options off of the table without having a full understanding of how things could develop. So again, it's not part of the current plan, but I'm not going to remove an option for the president that is on the table. Sean.
Did the United States airstrike a girls' elementary school and kill 175 people?
Not that we know of, Sean, and the Department of War is investigating this matter. And I would just tell you very strongly, the United States of America does not target civilians, unlike the rogue Iranian regime that targets civilians, that kills children, that has killed thousands of their own people in the past several weeks, and uses propaganda quite effectively. And unfortunately, many people in this room have fallen for that propaganda. So I would caution you from pointing the finger at the United States of America when it comes to targeting civilians, because that's not something that these armed forces do. Reagan.
Thanks, Caroline. Prior to the Iran conflict, the SAVE Act was really the focus of the news cycle. Is the SAVE Act still a priority for the administration?
Absolutely.
Just provide an update on the administration's talks with Congress to get the SAVE Act through.
SAVE Act is absolutely still a priority for this president and the administration. The focus, of course, of much of the president's time right now is on ensuring the success of Operation Epic Fury, but the president can walk and chew gum at the same time, and he's very much continuing to focus on the issues that matter here at home for the American people, including the passage of the SAVE Act, including on bringing down the cost of living, which is why you'll see the president in about an hour and a half at the Ratepayer Protection Pledge Roundtable, where he will be sitting with big tech companies, with AI companies who are building in communities across the country and have pledged to pick up the cost of the electricity tab in these small towns and communities across the country, which is a great thing for American consumers. So you'll be hearing from the president directly on this very important domestic agenda item later this afternoon. And it's something that he mentioned in his State of the Union address. So check it off the list as another promise made and kept by this president. Sure, go ahead.
Caroline, I just wanted to get back to Danny's question. So those four objectives that you read out do not explicitly include regime change. If those objectives were achieved and the Islamic Republic still existed, would that be an acceptable outcome?
It's a hypothetical question that I'm not going to engage in. Again, right now, the president and the commander-in-chief are focused on executing the success of Operation Epic Fury, which we are already doing so in a very tremendous and impressionable way. Stephen.
Thank you, Caroline. Two questions. The Trump administration reportedly is considering arming Kurdish forces in the hopes of inspiring a popular uprising in Iran. Could you comment on that report?
I can comment on the fact that the president has held many calls with partners, allies, and leaders in the region, in the Middle East. He did speak to Kurdish leaders with respect to our base that we have in northern Iraq. But as for any report suggesting that the president has agreed to any such plan is completely false and should not be written.
President Trump was saying yesterday that he's okay with someone from within taking over in Iran. He spoke about how Venezuela he saw as a successful model where Delcy Rodriguez took over and had a better relationship. Iran's President Pezeshkian, he took office in 2024 as a relative reformer. He's part of a three-man council now replacing the supreme leader. Does President Trump see him as a potential successor who is more viable?
Again, that's another hypothetical, and I haven't spoken to the president about this specific individual, so I don't want to get ahead of him on any assessments that should be made.
Thank you. Yesterday, the president acknowledged that oil prices will be a bit high. As for gas prices here in the U.S., what is the admin doing right now to counter that? I mean, should they skyrocket? Is there a plan to help Americans right now with those higher gas prices? And then a second question. On the rash that was on the president's neck, the White House physician said it was a preventative skin cream that he was using. But why is the president using this cream? What are they trying to prevent with this cream?
To your second question, I don't have anything additional to add to the physician statement that we provided to all of you on those questions, but I know the statement said that the redness on the neck will dissipate within the next couple of weeks. To your first question about oil prices, thank God we have a president who has exuded American energy dominance over the past year, and an administration that is wholeheartedly focused on keeping prices stable as best as we can. Of course, this operation is temporary to protect the homeland, but crude oil prices did fall yesterday. They remain stable today after the president announced steps to ensure the stability in global energy markets. Again, those include the DEC offering reasonably priced political risk insurance and the potential for the U.S. Navy to provide protection for the flow of energy through the State through the Strait of Hormuz. It is the president's belief and his economic team's belief that the economy continues to be very strong, it's robust, and will be able to weather any of the temporary impacts of Operation Epic Fury. John.
Thanks a lot, Caroline. Just to follow up to that, the timeline for making the Strait of Hormuz safe for oil tankers to transport their oil through the strait, what is that timeline, and what can the president do to speed up that timeline?
I don't want to commit to a timeline, but certainly it's something that is being calculated actively by both the Department of War and the Department of Energy. They're working very closely. Both secretaries are in all of the briefings on this subject with the president, and this is, again, something they're monitoring. And if and when necessary, the United States Navy will provide assistance to escort oil tankers through the strait. Sure, in the blue.
Thank you, Caroline.
You're not in blue, Andrew. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I guess you are, sort of. I'll go to you after.
You had mentioned about the commercial aircraft being used for the evacuations. What about the use of military aircraft? Would that happen in conjunction with that or subsequent to?
That is something that is definitely underway. And of course, we're going to use that in conjunction. We want as many planes, whether they're chartered, commercial, or military, taking Americans out of the Middle East and returning them safely home. So yes. Andrew, go ahead. You're welcome.
You listed a long list of grievances against the Iranian government, going back to the takeover of the embassy in 79, barracks bombing, the 80s, etc. But no one from the administration has laid out the imminent threat that was supposed to be taken care of by this. And the rationales offered by, say, Secretary Rubio, the president's national security advisor, said that the threat was retaliation against American interests from Iran after Israeli strikes. The president says it was his own feeling that Iran was going to attack. Why is it that across the administration you can't say what the imminent threat against the United States was that required us to launch this? And also, Prime Minister Starmer told Parliament today that his reason that he didn't allow the use of British bases was that he was not satisfied that there was a lawful basis and a viable, thought-through plan. Was there an attempt to provide the UK government with a legal basis for these strikes and a viable, thought-through plan?
To the first question, I completely reject the premise of your question. You have had the President of the United States, the Secretary of War, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the Vice President of the United States, the Secretary of State, and now I am out here today to explain to you exactly what led the President to make the decision to launch Operation Epic Fury. And President Trump does not make these decisions in a vacuum. This decision to launch this operation was based on a cumulative effect of various direct threats that Iran posed to the United States of America, and the president's feeling based on fact that Iran does pose an imminent and direct threat to the United States of America, based on the fact that they are the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, based on the fact that they were rapidly and aggressively building up their ballistic missile program to give themselves immunity within their country alongside their navy so that inside their country they could continue to create nuclear weapons and nuclear bombs, which would of course pose a risk to Americans in the region and even Americans one day here at home. And then another point on this is the president found that through these extensive, exhaustive, failed negotiations with Iran, that they were hell-bent on death and destruction. So again, the president was not going to be just another president on a very long list who sat back and stood by and passed the buck of this direct threat to the next administration. The president had a feeling, again, based on fact, that Iran was going to strike the United States, was going to strike our assets in the region, and he made a determination to launch Operation Epic Fury based on all of those reasons. And I would like the media to actually report on all of them, rather than just picking sound bites from one person in this administration and saying, oh, they're contradicting the other person. No, again, these decisions are not made in a vacuum. They are made by the president's feeling that Iran was going to strike the United States and our assets in the region, and he was not going to sit back and watch that happen. The determination was made that the president was going to strike first alongside Israel, and that has obviously been proven to be the right decision and an effective one at that. Libby, go ahead.
Thank you, Caroline. A two-part question for you. First, has the president spoken with the family members of those U.S. service members that were killed? Second, given what you've outlined throughout this entire briefing, I mean, the United States has sunk a bunch of Navy ships. We've hit all of these targets. What can Americans expect the goal to be moving forward now that the U.S. has accomplished all of this? What is victory, given we've even taken out Iran's supreme leader? That was a source of gold.
Again, victory will be determined by the commander-in-chief once the goals and the objectives that we have repeatedly laid out are fully realized. Again, we just in the next few hours will be achieving that dominance over the skies, which means the United States military will be raining missiles and weapons down on Iran to hit these specific targets that have been identified as crucial to take out by the Department of War. John.
Thanks so much, Caroline. Has the U.S. posture changed in regard to a nuclear North Korea, given the latest strikes on Iran and the fact that the stated goal is to make sure that Iran is not a nuclear country?
I don't have any change in position with respect to North Korea today.
Thank you. A quick follow-up. There's been reports that Ali Khamenei's son has been elected as the next supreme leader. Does the administration think that he is a part of the same regime as his father? Would they like people in the country to rise up and get him out of
There's
power?
reports he's been elected or that he's assuming to be elected. One of the likely options.
Pardon me, what was that?
That he's one of the likely options or that he has been elected. Okay, so we'll wait to confirm until someone actually is elected.
The president is going to attend the dignified transfer for these families. Given what Secretary Hegseth said this morning, is it the position of this administration that the press should not prominently cover the deaths of U.S. service members?
No, it's the position of this administration that the press in this room and the press across the country should accurately report on the success of Operation Epic Fury and the damage it is doing to the rogue Iranian regime that has threatened the lives of every single American in this room. If the Iranian regime had their choice, they would kill every single person in this room. And so we can all be very grateful that we have an administration and that we have men and women in our armed forces who are willing to sacrifice their own lives for the rest of us in this room and for every American across the country and for every troop that is based in the Middle East. That's what these...
Secretary Hegseth was complaining that it was front page news about these 6 service members who were killed.
That's not what the secretary said, Caitlin, and that's not what the secretary meant, and you know it. You know you are being disingenuous. There is not... We've never had a Secretary of Defense. Who cares more?
Drones get through or tragic things happen. It's front page news. I get it. The press only wants to make the president look bad.
Yeah,
As you know, we cover
press
the deaths of U.S. service members under every president.
The press does only want to make the president look
regime
bad.
as activists of the regime have launched their war against Israel. On the screen, we can see one of the command posts that we have targeted today. It's the Center for Al-Quds Brigade's Special Operations Command Post. This command post destabilizes the regional stability. Hezbollah terrorist organization continues its attempts to target the security of our citizens. And they have launched anti-tank, anti-armored missiles during this. A couple of our soldiers have sustained medium injuries. This firing from Hezbollah in parallel with attacks from Iran proves that Hezbollah is an arm of Iran. We will not allow this situation to continue. We have doubled protection of the people of the North. We shall continue insisting on disarming Hezbollah. This is a demand that we will not back down of citizens of Israel. We are aware that we are facing challenges. Sometimes we ask you to spend a long time in your shelters, and we would like to commend your steadfastness and resilience. And we are 100% sure that this saves lives. Our primary concern is protecting you. We review all the conditions and the situation around the clock, and you need to understand that we will never expose you to danger. Question: is your order to evacuate all Lebanese citizens to the north of Litani River? Does this mean you are going to control the region? The military asks civilians to evacuate their areas to protect them. Once again, they reside and dwell in locations where Hezbollah operates, and we are going to attack them. Hezbollah is an arm of the Revolutionary Guard, and we work toward to increasing protection of the northern parts. Question: do you believe that your military action would lead to toppling the regime? Answer: I am 100% sure that we have launched this campaign to eliminate the existential threat against Israel. The objective of this campaign is to eliminate threats against Israel, and this is what we are doing to continue attacking the regime. We have struck their leadership and many of its components, and we shall continue. We will strike even deeper all the time until we eliminate the existential threat. Is the combined firing against Iran and Hezbollah are planned? The answer is true. Today we have launched missiles simultaneously.
אין ספק שחיזבאללה הוא עובד אצל משמרות המהפכה באיראן, הוא זרוע של משמרות המהפכה באיראן. הוא מחריב את לבנון, הוא פועל נגד האינטרסים של לבנון. אנחנו נמשיך לפגוע בו.
שאלת כאן חדשות.
Well, you've been listening to the military spokesperson of the Israeli armed forces. That's Brigadier Efi Defrin there. It is 19 GMT, just past 19 GMT, and you're watching Al Jazeera's coverage of the conflict between the U.S., Israel, and Iran. I'm Cyril Venier. U.S. and Israeli strikes have been hitting cities across Iran. These are the latest pictures from northern Tehran. Since Saturday, U.S. and Israeli attacks across the country have killed more than 900 people, according to the health ministry. Speaking just moments ago, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt has defended President Donald Trump's rationale for going to war.
The president had a feeling, again, based on fact, that Iran was going to strike the United States, was going to strike our assets in the region, and he made a determination to launch Operation Epic Fury based on all of those reasons. And I would like the media to actually report on all of them, rather than just picking sound bites from one person in this administration and saying, oh, they're contradicting the other person. No, again, these decisions are not made in a vacuum. They are made by the president's feeling that Iran was going to strike the United States and our assets in the region, and he was not going to sit back and watch that happen. The determination was made that the president was going to strike first alongside Israel, and that has obviously been proven to be the right decision and an effective one at that.
Turkey has become the latest country to intercept an Iranian missile. A ballistic missile fired from Iran towards its airspace was shot down by NATO's air defenses in the eastern Mediterranean. The Pentagon says it doesn't anticipate that this incident will bring NATO into the war. And the Pentagon has also released footage of its submarine torpedoing an Iranian naval vessel in the Indian Ocean. Sri Lanka rescued 32 submariners after receiving a distress call. The country's deputy foreign minister saying that at least 87 people were killed in that attack. And Israel has carried out a new wave of strikes across Lebanon, killing at least 72 people and injuring hundreds since Monday. It has struck what it's called Hezbollah infrastructure in southern Beirut. The Israeli military has also made ground incursions into several towns in southern Lebanon. Well, we're live in Tehran, in Qatar's capital, Doha, and Ramallah, that's in the occupied West Bank. We're also live at the White House, and we're on Capitol Hill. First, Mohammed Val, who is in the Iranian capital for us. Mohammed, the U.S. says it has destroyed the Iranian Navy and is about to achieve complete control and dominance of Iranian skies. I'm wondering what you can report on the military side of things on your end and what the Iranian Revolutionary Guard are saying.
Cyril, there have been explosions just an hour ago on the outskirts of Tehran. So that campaign against Iran is going on, and it is being expanded. We have cities across the country that have been hit. Azerbaijan, eastern Azerbaijan, where 55 people have been killed. We have Bushehr, we have Isfahan, and we have Qazwin, where 6 people were killed. So the toll also among civilians is rising, and the number of targets is being increased across the country. But at the same time, also we have the Revolutionary Guard announcing that they have started their 18th wave of the so-called True Promise #4 operation against the enemy. And that's a combination of drones and missiles. They have mentioned a drone, an Iranian-made drone called Hadid 110 being used for the first time today in this campaign. An indication of the fact that Iran still has a lot of things to reveal in terms of its power, its military strength in this campaign. Regarding the Navy, Iranians are denying that their Navy has been decimated, and they are talking about operations as far as 600 kilometers in the Indian Ocean against American targets. They are also talking about a continuation of strikes against Israel and US bases in Kuwait, northern Iraq, and other countries. So there is nothing in their statements that denotes any kind of reduction of the possibilities, capabilities in terms of military action against the enemy. That's what they are saying.
Now, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, says that the war will last for as long as President Donald Trump decides. Speaking at the Pentagon earlier, he also told reporters that the U.S. has unleashed sheer destruction on Iran.
We are only 4 days into this, and the results have been incredible. Historic, really. Only the United States of America could lead this, only us. But when you add the Israeli Defense Forces, a devastatingly capable force, the combination is sheer destruction for our radical Islamist Iranian adversaries. They are toast, and they know it.
The U.S. says it is confident about the operation against Iran. Speaking at the Pentagon earlier, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, warned that Washington is stepping up its attacks. He said, in the next 24 to 48 hours, the U.S. will continue striking Iran's naval capability and infrastructure. Kane said 500 ballistic missiles have so far been launched, at least by Iran, as well as more than 2,000 drones. But he stressed that the number of ballistic missiles fired has declined by 80% since the first day of fighting, and it's in similar proportions with drones. Manuel Rapallo is in Washington, D.C. You followed that briefing, Manuel. We're 100 hours into this war. Walk us through into a little bit more detail, if you wouldn't mind, what the U.S. military is saying about what it's achieved so far and what the priority is moving forward.
Right, Cyril, we heard a little bit of that sound from Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth in your introduction there. This was a news conference that the Defense Secretary held along with the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane. This was more than anything else an update, an operational update on military advances for Operation Epic Fury that the United States continues to conduct in conjunction with the Israeli military. Secretary Hegseth said in no uncertain terms that America is winning. He touted the sinking of an Iranian warship by a U.S. torpedo, something that he says has not occurred since World War II. He spoke about U.S. air and naval superiority, the undermining of Iranian naval assets, as well as what exactly the United States has flying in the skies over Iran, B-2 bombers, stealth fighters, as well as U.S. drones. They spoke at great length, both the Defense Secretary and the Chairman of Joint Chiefs, about exactly what has been achieved so far, the targeting of Iranian missiles, the neutralizing of Iranian missiles, and also one thing that I found interesting was General Kane also spoke at length about other objectives, including undermining Iran's ability to hold influence outside of its borders. The Secretary of Defense saying that Iranian leadership has all been killed at this point. But again, this was a news conference that was very much an update in terms of military objectives and military advances by the United States, but it was also an attempt by the Secretary of Defense to mitigate some of that pressure and criticism that we've seen mounting over the course of the last few days regarding those objectives themselves, the clarity of what the United States is hoping to achieve and how exactly these objectives suit U.S. interests.
Manny, thank you very much. I want to introduce Paul Musgrave, who's joined us in the studio. He's an associate professor at Georgetown University, Qatar, and focuses on U.S. foreign policy. A couple things. I think the first one, I'd just like your thought on the military progress of the campaign so far. Not the politics, not the future. We'll do that in a second. The U.S. is saying unmitigated success, that they've downed the Navy, that they've made a lot of headway to getting rid of many of the ballistic missiles. They want to keep going, and that they're about to have complete control of Iran's skies.
Well, I think that, the air war, it's no surprise. We all learned last year during the 12-day war that Iran's air defenses were weaker than were assumed. Those were already depleted. The United States has succeeded there in concert with Israel. The naval war, more of a surprise, but still, the United States Navy versus the IRGC Navy and the Islamic Republic's Navy. Obviously, that's going to happen. Ballistic missiles, if you're on the ground here, you might be a little bit more skeptical about that because we still hear the intercepts. People still are very grateful for the defenses, but also a little bit nervous about how long they could hold out. But then what you did not hear about was the drones. Iran is a world-leading manufacturer of cheap drones like the Shaheds, which we've seen used increasingly. And those are the sorts of things that we're not hearing about. But all these statistics, all these data points, these are something that when we talk about strictly military applications, yes, those are indications I'm sure the Pentagon is very happy with.
Now, Caroline Leavitt, the White House spokesperson, was asked a really interesting question. You were in the studio moments ago listening to this with us, and she was asked, look, if the U.S. military can actually complete and achieve its specific military goals, getting rid of ballistic missiles, getting rid of the Navy, achieving airspace dominance, and attacking Iran's armed groups in the region that are allied with Iran. It's still a big if, but if you achieve all those things and the government of Iran hasn't changed, you still have the political system in place, then what? Do you consider that you've achieved your goals or not? She didn't answer.
No, there were several points in that press conference where very specific questions about what the United States endgame is, what a victory condition would look like for the United States, where Leavitt, who is no shining, like she is going to go after the jugular, just backed away, which makes me wonder if she is holding open options for President Trump rhetorically to find one of those off-ramps that people are talking about, which I'm sure that regional governments are looking for very hard. The big complication here is that the United States has its interests and agenda, but this is a two-country war, and Israel has very different interests and agendas. So we might be seeing some daylight here, some attempt to create space, but there's another player here that will also shape the outcome.
And Israel has already said, in fact, that whoever is chosen as a possible next successor, if it's within this framework and if it has anything to do with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, that person is already and preemptively marked for assassination. So we know that for Israel, they won't accept anybody that the IRGC might choose or who might come out of the clerical establishment they wouldn't accept anybody like that as a possible next leader in Iran. And the U.S. just didn't want to engage with that. What do you think are plausible scenarios based on where we are on day 5, 100 hours into this conflict?
100 hours is a magic number. That is when, in the 1991 U.S. war, the coalition war against Iraq, 100 hours of ground campaigns, the United States declared victory. Doesn't look like anything like that is going to happen, but there could be a point at which the United States decides, President Trump decides, that victory conditions have been met. And you heard Caroline Leavitt said that the commander-in-chief, President Trump, will decide when victory has been met. That is a big step away from saying there's a checklist that they're going to look for. Again, the United States does not own this war entirely. It's in a partnership here. But there is something where perhaps if you start to see military objectives being achieved, the United States will say that adds up to a political victory. that is different from the regime change rhetoric, the more totalizing rhetoric we were hearing earlier, which suggests to me that maybe some people are looking at the poll numbers, at the economic impact, at the requests of regional governments and saying, let's find a way to wrap this up.
And there have been questions about the time frame of this military campaign, by the way. Interesting note from earlier today at the Pentagon briefing, Pete Hegseth, they started saying days, then they said weeks, 4 to 5. Pete Hegseth said maybe 8 weeks, maybe more. We're not taking anything off the table. Paul Musgrave, thank you very much for joining us in the studio. All right, let's head to Mike Hanna, who's at the White House. Mike, the decision to start a war is among the most consequential that any president can make. And we heard from Caroline Leavitt, the White House spokesperson, earlier. When it comes to an American president starting a new war in the Middle East, of course, that comes with a lot of baggage because everybody remembers Iraq 2003, seen as such a massive foreign policy blunder almost unanimously now. So on day 5 of this conflict, how is the Trump administration framing its decision to go to war?
Well, you mentioned 2003, the invasion of Iraq. Now, just to make clear, that particular operation was preceded by weeks of the then administration persuading the American people of the need to carry out that action. It was debated among the American public, and although the reasons were falsely given, as history has clearly shown, it was a matter for debate in the public before the decision was taken. Move forward 22 years, no. There is no debate in the public. There has not been. The action was taken unilaterally by the country's president, who announced it to the American people in a recorded address in the early hours of the morning. So this is a very different set of circumstances here. What we've heard from the administration in terms of a rationale for this decision by President Trump is essentially the military objectives of what is going on. We heard again from the press secretary lining out the 4 military objectives of what this operation is all about. What we do not have from the administration is what is the end result? What is the end objective? At what stage does the president say, we have achieved what we wanted to achieve? Now, this is the thing that is gapping the gap that is there, and is something that the American people may well be asking about more vociferously in the days and indeed weeks ahead. But at the moment, that is the gap in information. What exactly is the end? What exactly is the off-ramp for the U.S. To say, right, we've achieved what we've set out to do? We hear from the Pentagon, the president will decide that. We haven't had an indication of exactly what is going through the president's head and what his chain of thought is in terms of what these ultimate objectives are.
Mike Hanna at the White House, thank you very much. The U.S. Senate is meeting for debate on a resolution aimed at curbing President Donald Trump's ability to wage war on Iran. If passed, it would require the withdrawal of U.S. forces from the fighting unless Congress gives the green light, but it is unlikely to do that because Republicans hold a majority in the Senate. Let's head over to Heidi Jo Castro, who's on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. Heidi, you're expecting a Senate vote that could, in theory, limit the U.S. military campaign. Can you outline, well, first of all, the theory, and then what practice we're expecting?
Sure. Well, the U.S. Constitution is quite explicit, saying it is the U.S. Congress that has the right to declare war, not the president. And so, in theory, the resolution that's being introduced by both Democrat Tim Kaine and a Republican Rand Paul in the Senate is supposed to curb president's powers there. It's supposed to make sure that Congress authorizes further military intervention in Iran and have it so that even just a single member can force a vote to withdraw troops from Iran. But in practice, we have not seen this play out. President Trump, of course, authorized these strikes on Iran without consulting Congress first. In fact, the U.S. has not declared war officially since World War II, and ever since then, historians argue there's been an erosion of this power of Congress to hold the key to war or no war. And so today, here in the Senate, this resolution is likely to not pass. That's because, though it has a Republican sponsor, there are no other Republicans who have said they will support this bill, and they need at least 5 additional ones to cross the line in order to pass this resolution in this Republican-controlled chamber. And even if they were to achieve that, they face the same battle in the Republican-controlled House. And then, of course, the president can just wipe it all away with the presidential veto. And the War Powers Resolution has never in history overcome a presidential veto. So there is a lot at stake here, but also a lot holding back this resolution. Democrats, though, have been quite vociferous, saying they are concerned about where this war is going, the open-ended nature of it, saying that it has amplified. And Senator Chuck Schumer, the minority leader in the Senate, saying he fears that the administration does want to eventually send U.S. troops on the ground to Iran, which the American public has been very clear that they oppose. In fact, only 1 in 4 Americans polled by Reuters say they approve of Trump's decision to launch these attacks against Iran.
Heidi, thank you very much. Let's bring it now over to this part of the world in the Gulf. Only days after, in fact, hours after Qatar has been targeted by Iran's missiles, Qatar's Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani has held a phone call with Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. In a statement after the call, Qatar said this: the Prime Minister firmly rejected claims by Iran that the missile attacks were directed solely at U.S. interests. The facts on the ground clearly show that the attacks struck civilian and residential areas inside the state of Qatar. He stressed that such attacks reveal no goodwill on Iran's part towards its neighbors. Laura Khan is in Doha. You're following developments in the wider Gulf, but let's start with this. What more did we hear from Qatar, Laura?
Well, this is very important, and there's a big question as to whether this is a turning point. There has been a lull today, and especially this evening, in the number of attacks coming from Iran. We've seen cruise missiles, we've seen ballistic missiles and drones coming over the past few days, but this has really dropped significantly. We've heard nothing so far this evening. Now, the Qatari Prime Minister had this conversation over the phone with Abbas Araghchi, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iran. Now, these are historically friendly countries. This was challenged last June during a 12-day war, Israel and Iran, the US getting involved. When they attacked Al Udeid air base, this really challenged the foreign ministry, who said that the only reason they didn't respond at that time is they didn't want to create regional instability. But this time round, they're essentially saying that they have every right to respond, that this is an attack on its sovereign territory, that it's attacked its energy infrastructure. There's been a thwarted attack on Hamad International Airport, a very important hub, travel hub in the Middle East, and also on its military infrastructure. So they made it very clear that there is a disconnect between Iran essentially saying they're aiming to attack only US assets here, when they say, no, this is an attack not only on its sovereignty, but across the Gulf nations.
Nida Ibrahim now is in Ramallah, that's in the occupied West Bank. Nida, on day 5 of this military campaign.
Well, according to Israeli officials, they're saying that within hours, Israel will have air superiority over not just Tehran and west of Iran, but all the skies of Iran. This is, of course, according to sources in the Israeli military, saying that to the Israeli newspaper of Yedaot Ahronot, saying that this will allow them to operate there more freely, as well as the U.S. Air Force in the region and in areas that in east of Iran that it was a bit more difficult to operate in. We've also heard from the Israeli military spokesperson, General Avi Diffrin, who says that the Israeli forces have attacked at least 300 Iranian air defense systems, and that would allow them to kind of continue cracking down on Iranian facilities and Iranian, what they call terror industries. Of course, when they talk about that, they're talking about either ballistic missiles or nuclear facilities. And we've seen throughout the past 24 hours, Israeli officials boasting about targeting what they call a secretive nuclear facility, where the location was moved post the war with Iran, the last war with Iran in June. We're also hearing Israeli officials using a heavier rhetoric on Hezbollah in Lebanon, saying that the amount of rockets it was allowed to fire, it's something that they underestimated. And usually what that means is that the Israeli forces are kind of manufacturing earlier consent, if you may, that they are going to crack down heavily on Lebanon, even though we know that Hezbollah is nowhere near how it was before the war on Gaza started, so it's much weaker. But still, it's seen here that Israel found a very strategic moment in history, very strategic timing to try and attack Hezbollah and try and disarm it, if not eliminate the party altogether. So they're using that kind of, we underestimated Hezbollah and its abilities and its power as a way to prepare us for what's coming ahead in Lebanon.
Nida Ibrahim reporting out of Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Thank you very much. And U.S. President Trump has said that he expects the operation in Iran to be over in a matter of weeks. But a look at the history of American invasions shows that all too often they end up dragging on for longer than planned and ultimately fail to meet their policy goals. John Hendren reports from Washington.
The American bombs landing on Iranian soil follow a long history of U.S. intervention abroad. President Donald Trump might have been encouraged by the January success of the mission to capture Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro.
And they're going to make more money than they've ever made before. We'll help build their country again.
We have to make a judgment as to...
President John Kennedy learned the hard way that interventions can go badly and quickly wrong, as he explained after the failed attempt to overthrow Cuba's government at the Bay of Pigs in 1961.
Victory has 100 fathers and defeat is an orphan.
The U.S. has intervened in Latin America dozens of times before and after JFK's speech. Since then, more often than not, it wasn't the initial invasion where things went wrong. A lesson learned in Vietnam in the 1960s and 70s, and more recently in Afghanistan and Iraq, where George W. Bush prematurely declared mission accomplished in 2003, with fighting dragging on for years after. The lesson of U.S. interventions has often been that the power projected by the Pentagon often succeeds in leading to regime change. It's after that that things can get tricky. In recent decades, historian Max Friedman has watched one American president after another fail to learn that lesson.
And the United States has demonstrated time and again that we have the military strength, we have the capacity to smash up states that we don't like or we don't like how they're governed. But then to build a replacement that will be on balance better for the people who live there, for the people in the wider region, that's a rarer case that we don't encounter and we don't seem to have a recipe for it.
Those remembered as successes were often the shortest. The U.S. invasion of Grenada in 1983, Panama in 1989, and the first Gulf War in Kuwait in 1990.
Aggression is defeated, the war is over.
But thereby, that might explain the time frame set for Iran by President Trump.
We projected 4 to 5 weeks, but we have capability to go far longer than that.
Time and tactics will reveal whether this war keeps to Trump's schedule and meets his goal of regime change. John Hendren, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Turkey says an Iranian ballistic missile crossed into Turkish airspace after passing through Syria and Iraq. NATO air defense systems intercepted the missile before it caused any damage. And Turkey is the latest country to come under attack from Iran, but the only one so far that's a member of NATO. Al Jazeera's Sinem Kosioglu reports from the border between Iran and Turkey.
Here we are at the Kapaköy crossing between Iran and Turkey across Iran's Hoy. This is one of the busiest crossings between the two countries. Today, the crossings have been steady but controlled, as we have been informed that there's a technical failure on the other side of the border, Iranian side, and there are a few hundred people stuck to wait for their paperwork to be finished. We have been speaking to people who have been crossing from Iran to Turkey. Some of them are only Iranian citizens. Some of them also hold other nationalities like European nationalities. The opinion is divided. Some of them believe there might be a regime change in Iran, but most of them blame the United States and the Israeli strikes, saying that they are risking civilian lives in their country.
We were only hearing sounds, but we haven't seen anything in the city.
They say military targets are being struck, but we haven't seen it ourselves.
There are intense attacks. They have devastated Iran. I hope Turkey, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia unite and give a strong response to these Jews and Christians. Unfortunately, they've come to our doorstep in the Middle East. Our airspace is in their hands. I am calling on all Muslims, focus on technology and unite. We have no other choice.
When I heard Iranian in a war, and I have to back to my country to help my people and army.
Turkish authorities say there is no abnormality in the numbers of the people crossing from Iran into Turkey. The figures seem to be in parallel with the previous seasonal numbers, but still they say they prepare themselves to any possible scenario for a possible mass refugee influx from Iranian side into Turkey, taking their experience from the Syrian conflict. But of course, they underline that what's going on in Iran today is different than what happened in Syria. They're drawing attention to this, but they are preparing themselves and also Europe for any possible refugee influx. Sinem Köseoğlu, Al Jazeera, Van Kapıköy crossing by Iran border.
The U.S. has confirmed a torpedo from a U.S. submarine sank an Iranian warship in the Indian Ocean off the coast of Sri Lanka. Sri Lankan authorities say that they've recovered at least 87 bodies and that the ship was headed back to Iran from an eastern Indian port. Al Jazeera's Manel Fernandez has more from Gale in Sri Lanka.
And the grim task of dealing with the bodies. Now, this is another mortuary that has been commandeered here at the National Hospital in Galle. The second batch of bodies brought earlier, it was the main morgue. But obviously, we're hearing from staff that there is an issue with capacity. Usually, this hospital, a regional southern hospital, can manage up to 25 bodies. But from what we're hearing, we've got 87 bodies of the Iranian Navy soldiers who died in this incident off the Navy frigate in international waters, and authorities are trying to figure out how they must deal with them. Now, we're hearing from the embassy staff that the military attaché as well as a consular attaché were here trying to figure out the logistics. Obviously, there's a lot of paperwork and procedures that must be completed. Now, in terms of what exactly happened, we heard in the early hours of this morning that the Sri Lankan Navy received a distress signal about 40 kilometers off the coast here in Galle to assist this vessel, and they have been since sort of working in the seas to try and recover as many survivors and bodies. Manel Fernandez, Al Jazeera, Galle, southern Sri Lanka.
U.S. and Israeli strikes have been hitting cities across Iran. These are the latest pictures from northern Tehran. Since Saturday, U.S. and Israeli attacks have killed more than 900 people in the country. That's according to Iran's health ministry. Turkey has become the latest country to intercept an Iranian missile. A ballistic missile fired from Iran towards its airspace was shot down by NATO's air defenses in the eastern Mediterranean. Now, the Pentagon says that it doesn't anticipate that the incident will bring NATO into the war. And the Pentagon has also released footage of its submarine torpedoing an Iranian naval vessel in the Indian Ocean. Sri Lanka has rescued 32 submariners after receiving a distress call. The country's deputy foreign minister says at least 87 people were killed. Israel has carried out a new wave of strikes across Lebanon, killing at least 72 people and injuring hundreds since Monday. It has struck what it called Hezbollah infrastructure in southern Beirut. The Israeli military has also made ground incursions into several towns in southern Lebanon. The U.S. has focused many of its attacks on Iran's military assets, while Israel has focused strikes on Iran's leadership. Julieta Eiger takes a look at some of the critical sites that have been hit.
The US and Israel have launched thousands of strikes targeting more than 100 cities across Iran and hitting crucial government buildings, most notably the Tahrallah headquarters in Tehran. Now, this is a key command center used by the IRGC to quell widespread anti-government protests or any civil unrest. Also, in the capital, Tehran, the Revolutionary Court has been hit, and these satellite images clearly show some of the damage that's been sustained. Now, the Revolutionary Court is important because this is where many political opponents of the establishment have been tried. Another key target has been the office of the Assembly of Experts in the city of Qom. Who are the Assembly of Experts? Well, they're a clerical body made up of 88 members who were chosen by the supreme leader. They now have the crucial job of deciding who comes next. US President Donald Trump has also said that the attacks have almost destroyed Iran's entire navy. Most of those attacks have taken place here, across the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf of Oman. And again, satellite images have captured some of those strikes. This is an image clearly showing an Iranian vessel that's been hit off the coast of Bandar Abbas. But the strikes aren't isolated to military targets or government buildings. We've also reported attacks in the vicinity of hospitals. In the capital, Tehran, at least 2, and also in the city of Bushehr. But Iran's heritage has also been affected. This is a picture of Golestan Palace, and the images speak for themselves. The 16th century site that's crucial to Iran's royal heritage has been affected.
And the conflict has throttled global oil and gas supplies. Cargo vessels are avoiding now the Strait of Hormuz after Iran announced its total closure on Monday. That has caused energy prices to spike and sparked fears of worse to come. On Tuesday, President Trump said the U.S. Navy can escort cargo vessels and provide shipping insurance as companies drop their war risk cover. But that hasn't dampened industry fears. Cargo giant Maersk on Wednesday announced a shipping halt to Gulf countries around the strait. At least 200 vessels are currently stranded in the Arabian Gulf, unable to fulfill oil and natural gas shipments. One of the nations that stands to benefit from higher energy prices is Russia. But it's not just about the money, as Dmitry Medvedenko reports from Moscow.
Russia is one of the largest oil and gas producers in the world. One huge advantage it has now, it's not in the Middle East. With Iran blocking the Strait of Hormuz, disrupting global oil and gas supplies from the region, Moscow, with its vast resources, seems perfectly poised to step in. Except it can't, at least for now, due to large-scale sanctions imposed on it because of the war in Ukraine. Russian energy exports have been squeezed by the West, leaving Moscow with just a handful of buyers of its oil, notably China, India, and Turkey, and it's selling at a massive discount. So the jump in oil prices would be beneficial for Russia, but probably not as much as it will likely benefit other exporters like the US. Still, there could be other gains. The escalating Iranian attacks on Gulf countries are causing importers to review their concerns about buying from Russia.
There's growing interest from India to buy more of our oil. Obviously, there are many uncertainties these days given the situation in the Middle East. We've also been watching Europe gradually soaring the branch they're sitting on. There's a general deficit of natural gas. Today's volatility in gas prices is a sign of just how unstable this market is.
Europe has been phasing out Russian energy imports. It's still buying around 13% of its gas from Moscow, but the plan is to drop that to zero by late next year. Norway's energy minister says the EU has been very clear that they want to liberate themselves from Russian oil and gas, but then the events of the last 3-4 days have also been difficult. With the geopolitical situation we see now, I believe the debate will be revived. Kirill Dmitriev, head of Russia's sovereign wealth fund, is blaming Europe for what he called short-sighted decisions. He's the one leading talks on removing sanctions imposed on Russia. The Middle East crisis could end up improving Russia's positions at talks on ending the war in Ukraine and lifting sanctions. Now that Europe and other importers may be more interested in seeing Russian resources make a comeback. Dmitry Medvedenko, Al Jazeera, Moscow.
The conflict in the Middle East has sent Asian stocks tumbling. Countries, including China, Japan, and South Korea, rely heavily on energy from the Gulf, making them vulnerable to supply disruptions. In Seoul, the stock market plunged more than 12% on Wednesday and fears that the war could cripple Asia's fourth largest economy sent the local currency to a 17-year low. Jack Barton reports from the South Korean capital.
Oil prices climb steadily higher as Asian stock markets continue to fall, but none as steep as South Korea's, which has plunged faster than during the global financial crisis nearly a decade ago.
The reason why Japan and South Korea's shares are falling so much is because Asian countries are the largest importers of Middle Eastern crude oil. This phenomenon is likely a consequence of this. Therefore, if the war is prolonged, South Korea's real economy itself will inevitably collapse.
It's already leading to long queues at the pump.
We don't produce any oil ourselves, and the international situation is becoming more serious by the day. On top of that, the $1 exchange rate keeps climbing. All of this is quite worrying.
Governments have been trying to reassure investors and the public.
Many Asian countries have large stockpiles of oil and gas that can cover short-term disruption, but would dwindle in the case of a sustained conflict.
South Korea and Japan are already working on diversification.
If the stable supply of LNG gets disrupted, we will respond by increasing supplies from other countries.
Alternatives from outside the Middle East will be more expensive, with soaring shipping rates adding to the rising cost of fuel. China has been pressuring Tehran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, a major maritime transport route. About 20% of global oil supplies pass through the waterway off the coast of Iran. A prolonged conflict is expected to push up global inflation and erode growth, with Asia bearing much of the short-term economic pain. Jack Barton, Al Jazeera, Seoul.
Joining us now is Tim Sahe. He is the co-director of the Net Zero Industrial Policy Lab at Johns Hopkins University, and he analyzes energy supply chains. You're joining us from New York. It's good to have you on the show. Donald Trump wants energy to keep flowing through the Strait of Hormuz. Again, as a reminder, we've said this a number of times, a reminder to our viewers, 20% of the world's oil goes through this very, very narrow waterway, which happens to be between Iran, and the Gulf region, which it has been attacking. So Donald Trump has announced two measures to do that. The first one is that the U.S. would provide shipping insurance to those vessels that carry the oil and the gas. Can that work?
The cost of insurance has been soaring right from the first day of the war. Insurance prices have jumped up. And that's why Donald Trump is trying to issue insurance and escort tankers safely with the U.S. Navy. The problem is very, very deep, and it is very unlikely that U.S. military ships will be able to force open the strait for as long as required. The main problem really is the fact that the oil is getting trapped in the Gulf and cannot get out. As the war goes on for longer, the problem of getting the oil out of the Gulf is going to be becoming bigger and bigger.
But Tim, why do you say it's very unlikely that the U.S. Navy can reopen the Strait of Hormuz? I mean, Donald Trump says if needed, that's what he will do. That's the second measure he announced. He says if needed, the U.S. Navy will escort these energy-carrying ships. You say that is unlikely to work. Why?
Well, Iran has been imposing pain by harassing ships and has a large arsenal of missiles and drones that the U.S.
But that's precisely what the U.S. is targeting.
It is targeting it. The whole question now is this sort of balance or this race between the missiles, the Iranian missiles, and their stockpiles and their launchers on the one hand, and the American and Israeli and Gulf Kingdom interceptors on the other hand. And this is a military balance. And, the U.S. has taken one side of the bargain, that it can degrade the launchers. The Iranians say that they have endurance capacity to continue to harass ships and oil infrastructure across the Gulf.
Okay, you're skeptical that the U.S. can actually put an end to the threat, Iran's military threat to the Strait of Hormuz. If you're right, and if there continues to be a threat on that waterway and therefore a threat on that energy choke point, what happens?
I mean, the main problem is that, it doesn't really matter what the military equation is. I mean, it matters as to how long the war goes, but these disruptions are just cascading into oil and gas markets globally. We've had, massive increases in gas in both Asia and in Europe. And these disruptions are not just going to be in the oil and gas markets, they're very quickly going to move on to the food and fertilizer markets because this gas is being converted into fertilizers and shipped out. So, you're going to get a cascading sort of disruption in food and fuel markets as long as the war goes on.
But Tim, I take your point that obviously closing the Strait of Hormuz or just reducing the flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz, oil and gas, is going to increase gas prices and it's going to hurt economies really around the world, has a global ripple effect. But we saw a similar thing at play when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022 and gas prices did go up. So that did materialize, but it didn't stop the war. It didn't force either side to stop its military campaign.
Yeah, in this case, the Iranians sort of like have this extreme use it or lose it kind of sort of dilemma where they are being degraded, their military capacity is being degraded, which is why they've resorted to attacking the oil and gas infrastructure very directly. This second thing that happened in the Ukraine war was sort of like a sustained 1 year, 2 year increase in gas prices. So far, as you've said, it's been on the short term. But the main problem is every week that the war goes on, every day that the war goes on, the market is forced to sort of reprice its risk of the long war. Currently, it thinks that the war is going to end quickly, but the moment people start to realize that Iran has a longer endurance capacity and will continue harassments, that's when you'll find a sudden and sharp increase in oil and gas prices globally.
You've said that this will hurt Europe, will hurt Asia, other parts of the world. It's not going to hurt the United States so much because they're energy independent or almost energy independent. So Donald Trump and the U.S. aren't as vulnerable to this as other parts of the world.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. There's a lot less risk to the U.S. that, U.S. gasoline prices and blowback will be much lower. That's what the Trump administration has explicitly said, that, the American oil will allow them to be insulated from the global impacts, and there won't be a major shock domestically in the U.S., and U.S. consumers will not face the pain at the pump. But the United States is currently responsible for the safety of its Gulf allies, and there'll be lots of other people pressuring the United States government to end the war quickly.
Understood. Tim Sahe, thank you so much for joining us on Al Jazeera.
Thank you.
Russia's foreign ministry says a nuclear plant in southern Iran is under threat, with strikes happening just kilometers away. Russian technical specialists work on site in Iran's Bushehr nuclear power plant. Russia says that the U.S.-Israeli bombing campaign is posing a big risk to the site. The International Atomic Energy Agency said Wednesday it detected no damage to the site or any risk from radiation so far. But Russia is now calling on the IAEA to look again and make what it called an objective assessment. Iran's spokesperson for the health ministry, Hossein Kermanpour, has given details about the casualties across Iran over the past 5 days.
We have had around 5,700 injured and killed across our country and nearly 800 martyrs. Most of them are civilians. Of course, military areas have been targeted a lot. However, one thing that's become common in this war is that I don't know why they don't respect that in addition to military centers in large cities, there are hospitals, schools, and universities. This cannot be respected at all. Of course, if any of these are targeted, our hospitals will also be affected. For example, Avaz, one of the southern cities of Iran, and a hospital called Abu Zar, which is a place where children are hospitalized, was a military complex and it was targeted. We transferred 26 patients from the ICU, all of which were children, and from the special ward. They transferred to other hospitals in other parts of Avaz. Every drop of blood is like the entire world being harmed. During the corona period, we realized that if the health of one region is at risk, the health of the world is at risk. And health is not something that can be played by the powers. Even if I live another 100 years, I will never allow myself to attack my enemy. If my enemy is even standing next to a hospital, I will not attack him because I know that there are people in hospitals who are weakened by their situation. I hope that rationality will prevail in human society, that health is not an issue that can can be plagued by wars, whether it is Iran or anywhere in the world.
Israeli airstrikes across Lebanon have intensified for the third day in a row. Multiple people have been killed in the southern cities of Tyre and Sidon. The Israeli military instructed residents of dozens of villages in southern Lebanon to evacuate. Lebanese militant group Hezbollah struck Israel on Monday in response to the killing of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. And Hezbollah Secretary General Naim Qassem addressed the people of Lebanon about the Israeli strikes on the country. The speech comes as Israeli officials warned that the leader of Hezbollah is now a target for elimination.
Israel is a dangerous threat to us, to our people and our country, and to the entire region.
Over the past several hours, Israel has hit multiple areas in Beirut's southern suburbs, which it says are Hezbollah infrastructure. Tens of thousands of people are uprooted from their homes, as Bernard Smith reports from the Lebanese capital.
Israel's forced evacuation order for southern Lebanon means tens of thousands of Lebanese families are fleeing north. It means schools like this in Beirut being turned into emergency shelters. But there is very little for them here at the moment. They're still short of milk, they say, of other foods. They're still short of mattresses. It's the first time that Israel has given an order to evacuate all of southern Lebanon just to the Litani River. People have been told to get north of that. Previously, Israel has ordered the evacuation of some villages, or groups of villages, or individual villages where there are people that they want to target. But what happened now is that the whole of southern Lebanon is having to leave. Rooms like this, classrooms like this, are being turned into people's homes. We're looking at a scenario very much like 2024, when Israel launched that widespread campaign across Lebanon, targeting Hezbollah, what they call Hezbollah infrastructure. That only ended with a ceasefire that Israel kept breaking, accusing Hezbollah of not disarming and accusing the Lebanese government of not doing enough to disarm Hezbollah. Well, now, again, all of those citizens, Lebanese citizens in the south of the country, caught in the middle of this, and it could be a very long campaign, and they're going to be stuck in this sort of emergency accommodation. Bernard Smith, Al Jazeera, Beirut.
As Israel strikes Lebanon, thousands of people are seeking safety in neighboring Syria. But Syria has closed its border crossings with Lebanon after receiving a warning from Israel that it may target it. It remains open for Syrians fleeing Lebanon. Obeda Hito has more from the border.
On the fourth day of what's quickly turning into a regional conflict between America, Israel, Iran, and several other regional actors, the humanitarian crisis is growing just as quickly. And what you're seeing behind me here is more people arriving, women and children, elderly people here in Syria. We're at the Jdeida-Tiabous border crossing, where Syrian officials say more than 25,000 people have arrived between here and the Jusia border crossing in Homs province over the last 2 days. The influx of refugees continues to grow, especially as the violence in Lebanon intensifies. As we speak, there are ongoing Israeli airstrikes on the southern suburbs of Beirut, as well as in the border areas in southern Lebanon, which is going to cause more waves of refugees to arrive to the country. There are UN agencies here on the ground at the border crossing, as well as the Ministry of Disasters and Emergency Management, ready to provide any kinds of medical services and psychosocial services to these people. Most of the people that we've spoken with have been on the road for a day or two, trying to reach the border crossing and actually get into Syrian territory. And officials here say they expect these numbers to continue to grow consistently, especially as the violence intensifies in Lebanon. But they say they're ready to accept anybody who wants to flee and make it to safety here in Syria. Obeda Hito, Al Jazeera, the Syrian-Lebanese border.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is framing the joint Israeli-U.S. offensive against Iran as a religious conflict. He has invoked Jewish history and used religious text and sentiment to rally support for the attacks. Al Jazeera's Noor O'Day explains how this fuels right-wing sentiment in Israel.
When he announced the offensive against Iran, the Israeli Prime Minister didn't just talk about perceived threats. Benjamin Netanyahu invoked Jewish history, drawing parallels with Jews rising up against Persian enslavement more than 2,000 years ago.
My brothers and sisters, in 2 days we celebrate the holiday of Purim. 2,500 years ago, in ancient Persia, an enemy rose against us with the exact same goal of destroying our people.
A day later, Netanyahu invoked scripture, describing the government in Tehran as Amalek, the ultimate enemy in the Old Testament, the enemy whose memory and existence must be erased.
We read in this week's Torah portions, remember what Amalek did to you. We remember and we act.
It's not the first time this reference is made by Netanyahu to justify violence against an adversary. In fact, his reference to Palestinians as Amalek was cited during hearings in the genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice. Inciting religious fervor is not unique to Netanyahu. It's a popular tactic that right-wing and populist leaders often use to rally support. And it often pays off. Opinion polls show how widespread these sentiments are. For example, last year, a poll by Hebrew University on Israel's war on Gaza found that 75% of Jewish Israelis believe there are no innocents in Gaza. A survey released last month by the Institute for National Security suggests 78% of Israelis consider Iran a serious threat. Mixing scripture with mainstream politics is playing with fire, and it's led to talk of greater Israel spanning from the Euphrates to the Nile River and erasing existing Arab countries in the process, an ambition referenced not only by Netanyahu, but also by the head of the opposition in Israel.
President Donald Trump announced that the United States was at war with Iran on social media, and that is where his previous views on war on Iran are resurfacing. Social media also revealing how members of his national security team have changed their stance as well. Here's Al Jazeera's Phil Lavelle in Washington.
American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people.
That is how Americans find out that they are at war, or at least that's how it used to be. Remember, we're in the year 2026 now, and things are very different.
A short time ago, the United States military began major combat operations in Iran.
That came on social media. It is a medium that President Trump loves. Across X and Truth Social, that's the platform that he owns, he reaches more than 120 million followers. It is the age of announcements by algorithm, policies on podcasts. But remember, the internet is forever. There is always a tweet, as some say. Case in point, the president's past posts, like this one, 2011. In order to get elected, Barack Obama will start a war with Iran. Remember, it's an election year here now, too, because the midterms are in November. And then there is this.
Our president will start a war with Iran because he has absolutely no ability to negotiate. He's weak and he's ineffective.
Vice President J.D. Vance is also a prolific poster and podcast guest, touching on this very issue before the election.
Our interest, I think, very much is in not going to war with Iran, right? It would be huge distraction of resources. It would be massively expensive to our country.
There he was in the Situation Room with Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard as those strikes began. She once ran to be leader of the Democrats, and also online you can see she sold T-shirts opposing any war with Iran as recently as 2020. Now, posts are flying off, eager to catch the president's eyes and ears. Some from his own party, furiously trying to turn him away from action. Republican Thomas Massey says, I am opposed. This is not America first. Former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene says Trump, Vance, Tulsi, all of us campaigned on no more foreign wars and regime change. Even the late influencer Charlie Kirk, nearly 6 months after he was murdered, Republicans are now reminding Trump of his views on regime change.
Okay, that sounds good, but that's pathologically insane. I'm sorry, it is.
But the president is also getting a huge amount of support online as well. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham calling Netanyahu and Trump the modern-day Roosevelt and Churchill. Senator Tom Cotton saying the president was right to act. Even Democrat John Fetterman saying President Trump has been willing to do what is right and necessary to produce real peace in the region. Ultimately, nobody knows how long this war will last, when the US will deem mission accomplished.
but the best indication you could do worse than keeping an eye on social media. Bill Lavelle, Al Jazeera, Washington.
It is now 20 GMT. You're watching Al Jazeera's coverage of the conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran. I'm Cyril Vanier. US and Israeli strikes have been hitting cities across Iran. These are the latest pictures from northern Tehran. Since Saturday, US and Israeli attacks across the country have killed more than 900 people, according to the health ministry. Israel has carried out a new wave of strikes across Lebanon, killing at least 72 people and injuring hundreds since Monday. The Israeli army is telling residents in dozens of villages in southern Lebanon to evacuate as it strikes what it calls Hezbollah targets. The group struck Israel on Monday in response to the killing of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. And the Pentagon has released footage of its submarine torpedoing an Iranian naval vessel in the Indian Ocean. The Sri Lankan deputy foreign minister says at least 87 people were killed. 32 submariners were rescued after receiving a distress call. Turkey has become the latest country to intercept an Iranian missile. A ballistic missile fired from Iran towards its airspace was shot down by NATO's air defenses in the eastern Mediterranean. Now, the Pentagon says that it does not anticipate that the incident will bring NATO into the war. This being a question because Turkey is a NATO member. Well, we are live in Tehran, in Doha, in Washington, D.C., from the White House and from Capitol Hill. First, though, we go to Mohammed Val, who's in the Iranian capital. So, Mohammed, in light of U.S. claims that it has destroyed Iran's navy and that it will soon have total control of Iran's skies, what military developments are you seeing?
Cyril, we have explosions right across the country, and particularly in Tehran. We have heard explosions just a bit a while ago on the outskirts of Tehran. We have also raids on Bandar Abbas to the south, Tabriz to the northwest. New also explosion sounds western, as I said, west of Tehran again. And in other cities, earlier on in the day, we have Bushehr, Qazwin, where 6 people were killed. We have East Azerbaijan provinces, where 55 people were killed. And that's the situation, a continuation of airstrikes, and people are falling, wounded and killed. There is mention of 300 children and adolescents hospitalized of various wounds in various parts of the country. The Red Crescent has given new figures talking about more than 6,186 people injured and 2,000 still hospitalized, about 1,000 people killed. So the death toll among civilians is rising by the minute, and that promise by Israel and the US to widen this campaign is materializing on earth here on the ground here in Iran. People bracing for tougher days to come, but also the National Revolutionary Guard is talking about stepping up its campaign of resistance or of defense for the country, talking about the 18th wave of the so-called True Promise, number 4, a combination of drone attacks and missiles against various targets in Israel and also in northern Iraq, in Erbil, and in Kuwait. 2 US bases there have been hit. They're talking about continuous action in the sea, also against tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. The latest one was hit just a few hours ago, and it's still on fire, according to reports by the Iranian army and the Iranian Revolutionary National Guard. Revolutionary Guard. So Iran is talking about defiance and showing that defiance on the ground. There is no let up in the number of drones and missiles being launched against various targets. Also, they are talking about American targets as far as 600 kilometers in the Indian Ocean. That claim by the Americans that they have completely decimated the national Iranian Navy, it is being denied by the Iranians, and the messages coming from both the president and the national security, the chief security, Ali Larijani, is that they have managed to kill 500 US servicemen. That's what Ali Larijani said. So, I mean, very, very different reports by the Iranians about the number of casualties, the amount of loss among American troops and Israelis. in this war.
Okay, well, that's very interesting because this claim by Ali Larijani that they've killed 500 U.S. troops is in stark contrast with the number that the U.S. is giving, that as far as we know, 6 U.S. troops have been killed so far. Mohammed Val reporting from the Iranian capital, Tehran. Thank you very much. Now, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, says that the war will last for as long as President Donald Trump decides. Speaking at the Pentagon earlier, he told reporters the U.S. has unleashed sheer destruction on Iran.
We are only 4 days into this, and the results have been incredible. Historic, really. Only the United States of America could lead this, only us. But when you add the Israeli Defense Forces, a devastatingly capable force, the combination is sheer destruction for our radical Islamist Iranian adversaries. They are toast, and they know it.
Meanwhile, the U.S. Senate is meeting for debate on a resolution aimed at curbing President Donald Trump's ability to wage war on Iran. If that resolution passes, it would require the withdrawal of U.S. forces from the fighting unless Congress gives the green light. But it's unlikely to because Republicans hold a majority in the Senate. Well, we're going to take all of this on with our U.S. correspondents. Kimberly Halkett is at the White House, Patty Culhane following that Senate vote on Capitol Hill. Manuel Rapallo has been following the press briefing at the Pentagon. So, Manuel, we start with you. We're 100 hours into this war. What is the U.S. military saying about what it's done so far and what it's about to do in the next few days?
Cyril, this was a press conference that took place early in the day on Wednesday between U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane. This was a news conference that was very much an operational update on military advances in this ongoing U.S. military operation dubbed Epic Fury that's happening in conjunction with the Israeli military. In no uncertain terms, the defense secretary said that America is winning. He touted several accomplishments, you say. This is not a mission accomplished situation. He called it a reality check. In many ways, one might argue that this was part news conference, part pep rally, given the sort of characteristically energetic delivery that the defense secretary tends to have. Pete Hegseth touted the sinking of that Iranian warship using an American torpedo, saying that this is something that hasn't been seen since World War II. He spoke about U.S. air and naval superiority, getting close to reaching one of those